It began in the frozen darkness of the Ardennes, a quiet Belgian town that had no reason to be remembered, until war came roaring through its streets. The date was December 16, 1944, and the forests around St. Vith were buried in snow. The men stationed there, American infantry, tank crews, and engineers, believed the war was nearly over. Hitler's armies were collapsing. The Allies had reached the borders of Germany, and victory seemed only weeks away. But in that frozen dawn, the silence shattered. From the mist-shrouded woods came the thunder of artillery, the rumble of tanks, and the cries of advancing troops. It was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, the last great German offensive of the Second World War, and at its heart, in a small crossroads town called St. Vith, a handful of soldiers would stand against the fury of an entire army. This is the entire history of the Battle of St. Vith, the Bulge's forgotten stand, where courage and chaos collided, and where the outcome of Hitler's final gamble was decided not by size, but by stubborn defiance. The German offensive had been conceived in desperation. As 1944 drew to a close, Hitler refused to accept defeat. The Allies had liberated France and were closing in on the Rhine, but the Führer believed one last strike could turn the tide. His plan was audacious, a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, the same route his armies had used in 1940. The goal was to split the Allied lines, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. It was a gamble of impossible scale, over 200,000 German troops, supported by tanks, artillery and paratroopers, massed in secrecy under cover of fog and snow. The Allies, convinced the Germans were broken, left the Ardennes lightly defended. The men holding St. Vith belonged mostly to the 8th Corps, the 7th Armoured Division, the 9th Armoured Division, and elements of the 28th Infantry Division, exhausted units recovering from months of combat. They were resting, repairing, and unprepared for what was coming. When the German artillery opened fire in the early hours of December 16, the sky itself seemed to break. Thousands of shells rained down across the Ardennes, cutting communication lines, destroying roads, and throwing the American front into chaos. Through the smoke and snow came the 5th Panzer Army, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, spearheaded by elite panzer divisions, including the feared 2nd Panzer and Panzer Lehr. Their orders were simple: take St. Vith, a critical crossroads linking the northern and southern flanks of the American line. Without it, the Allies would lose their ability to move reinforcements. The Germans believed they could seize it in a day. Instead, they would spend nearly a week battering against a wall of defiance. Commanding the defense was General Bruce C. Clarke, a man of calm under pressure, and General Robert Hasbrouck, leading the 7th Armoured Division. Together, they organized a desperate, improvised defense. The terrain around St. Vith, dense forests, narrow roads, and steep hills, favored the defenders. Clarke positioned his tanks along ridges and choke points, using every advantage of the ground. The snow fell thicker, the temperature dropped below freezing, and as the German armor rolled forward, the Americans fought with a tenacity that stunned their attackers. For every village captured, another stand was made. For every road seized, another was blocked. Artillery units fired until their barrels overheated. Infantrymen, half frozen and outnumbered, fought from foxholes filled with snow and mud, holding the line inch by inch. By December 18, the Germans had encircled the town. Columns of armor pushed from every direction, their black crosses faint through the blizzard. Yet inside the pocket, Clarke's men refused to yield. Communications were nearly gone. Supplies were dwindling, but the defenders of St. Vith, Americans, engineers, tankers, clerks, and even cooks pressed into service, turned every street into a fortress. The fighting became close and brutal. Tanks fired point blank in the narrow streets. Buildings collapsed under artillery fire. Machine guns rattled through the smoke and snow. Civilians fled or hid in cellars as the town became a ruin. Still, the Americans held. For 5 days, the Germans hurled everything they had at St. Vith. The 5th Panzer Army, delayed by this single town, began to lose precious time. The roads behind them jammed with vehicles. Fuel ran short. The meticulously timed offensive, built on speed and surprise, began to slow. Every hour St. Vith held was an hour stolen from Hitler's grand plan. By December 21, with encirclement nearly complete and ammunition gone, Clarke made the impossible choice to withdraw. Under cover of darkness and fog, his men slipped through the snowbound woods to the west, evading capture and rejoining Allied lines. When the Germans finally entered St. Vith, they found nothing left but rubble and silence. The crossroads was theirs, but the momentum was gone. The delay at St. Vith had bought the Allies the one thing they needed most: time. In those 6 days, the defenders of St. Vith had achieved the impossible. Outnumbered 5-1, they had blunted the spearhead of the German offensive. Their stand allowed reinforcements, including General Patton's Third Army, to move north and strike the German flank, turning the tide of the entire Battle of the Bulge. Without St. Vith, the story of the Ardennes might have ended very differently. Yet history has a way of forgetting the quiet victories. While the world remembers the siege of Bastogne, another heroic stand fought in the same frozen campaign, the men of St. Vith slipped into obscurity, their sacrifice buried beneath the snow and smoke of larger headlines. But in the archives of the war, their defiance remains a testament to the power of leadership, discipline, and the sheer will to endure. The cost was immense. The 7th Armored Division alone suffered over 5,000 casualties. Entire units ceased to exist. The town of St. Vith was leveled, reduced to rubble by German and Allied artillery alike. Its roads were littered with the wrecks of tanks and trucks frozen in place, their engines silent under the snow. When the battle finally ended in January 1945, the Ardennes lay in ruin. Tens of thousands were dead, the forests filled with twisted steel and shallow graves. The German offensive had failed, its power broken, its dream of reaching Antwerp destroyed. But the seeds of that failure were sown at St. Vith, in the days when a small town became a fortress and ordinary men became legends. Today, the rebuilt town of St. Vith stands quietly among the rolling hills of Belgium. The scars of war have faded, but beneath the calm lies the memory of that bitter winter. In the forests beyond, rusted helmets still lie buried in the earth. In the stillness, you can almost hear it, the distant thunder of artillery, the crackle of radio static, the shouted orders through wind and snow. St. Vith remains what it always was, a crossroads, a place where destiny turned, and where a forgotten stand helped save an army, and perhaps the entire Western Front. The Battle of St. Vith was not glorious. It was not clean, it was survival. A battle fought in exhaustion, confusion, and cold. But it was also one of the purest acts of defiance in the entire war. Against overwhelming odds, a handful of soldiers refused to break. They bought the time that changed history. Tonight we return to that frozen battlefield, to the crossroads buried in snow, to the sound of distant engines in the mist, and to the men who stood their ground when retreat was unthinkable. This is the entire history of the Battle of St. Vith, the Bulge's forgotten stand, the fight that stopped the tide and the courage that endured when hope was nearly gone. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening beneath quiet winter skies, or far from the cold, imagining the stillness before the storm? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. December 16th, 1944, St. Vith, Belgium, 6 o'clock in the morning. A heavy, overcast sky pressed down on the town, its church steeple and stone railway station outlined in the winter gloom, when the first vibrations rolled through the cobbled streets. Moments later, the earth shook as German artillery batteries of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division opened fire from wooded positions east of the Au River, unleashing their opening barrage of Operation Wacht am Rhein for the roughly 2,000 Belgian civilians still living in St. Vith, many of them shopkeepers, farmers and railway clerks. The thunder was indistinguishable from an earthquake. For the American soldiers of the recently arrived 106th Infantry Division, green troops holding their first combat sector, it was the shock of war tearing open a front that Allied intelligence believed to be quiet. Diaries later recovered from survivors recorded the instant transformation from a sleepy road junction in the Ardennes into a battlefield that would decide the timetable of Hitler's last gamble. At first glance, St. Vith was a small town like dozens scattered across the high fens, a cluster of red brick houses and slate roofs huddled around a medieval market square. Yet maps drawn by the U.S. Army's 1st Army G2 section in December 1944 identified something extraordinary. 6 major paved roads and a vital railway line converged on the town like spokes on a wheel. One route ran north to Malmedy and Liège, another south toward Luxembourg City. 2 more cut west toward Bastogne, while others led directly east into Germany's Eifel region. The German General Staff, reviewing their operational orders for Wacht am Rhein, underlined St. Vith in red pencil on situation maps, noting its junction as entscheidend, decisive. In military geography, crossroads are not symbolic, they are arteries, and the heart of the German advance pulsed straight through St. Vith. American commanders were acutely aware of what crossroads could mean. General Troy H. Middleton of V8 Corps stationed his weakest division, the 106th, along the Schnee-Eifel ridges near St. Vith, because he believed the quiet sector safe. In contrast, he concentrated veteran units like the 2nd Infantry Division further north, where he feared a possible German thrust. The Germans read this disposition with satisfaction. By comparison, Bastogne, defended by the elite 101st Airborne Division later in the campaign, was granted fame in both wartime headlines and post-war memory. St. Vith, entrusted to untested troops and overlooked by correspondents, seemed a mere dot on the map. Yet German planners in 5th Panzer Army knew that if St. Vith did not fall quickly, their tanks would bog down in winter mud, snowbound forests, and inadequate side roads. Reports written by Colonel Heinz Kokott of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division emphasized that the success of his sector depended on controlling the St. Vith road net within 2 days. His after-action testimony to the U.S. Army Historical Division in 1946 made the dependence explicit. The possession of St. Vith was absolutely necessary for the continuation of the attack. This was not a matter of prestige, but of fuel trucks and half-tracks. German panzers burned almost 200 liters of fuel every 100 kilometers, and their stocks were dangerously low. Every hour of delay imposed at St. Vith meant tanks idling without resupply, artillery without shells, and columns choking already narrow Ardennes lanes. Field evidence from stalled German convoys later showed the practical result: fuel drums abandoned, vehicles immobilized, and troops marching on foot toward the front. The first testimonies from American defenders, especially veterans of the 7th Armored Division, rushed in to support the thin infantry line, described the shock with vivid clarity. Sergeant Harold Reichelt recalled in a letter to his wife, dated December 19th, that the barrage came before dawn, 100 guns at once, and by daylight the sky was orange where barns and houses burned. Technical reports from the division's maintenance battalion recorded that 24 Sherman tanks had to be refueled and repositioned within the first 24 hours, working under constant artillery fire. Here the comparison between American and German mechanization mattered. The US Army could refuel from a seemingly endless stream of 2.5-ton GMC trucks, while the German 5th Panzer Army's supply columns faced shortages from the outset. The human consequence was that one side could keep fighting indefinitely, while the other fought against its own stopwatch. Broader implications of St. Vith's defense became clear only days later. But even on December 16th, 8th Corps staff recognized the potential catastrophe. Situation Report Number 47, filed from Middleton's headquarters at Bastogne. Vith would open all communications of 8th Corps to penetration. The phrasing, cold and precise, masked the terror of the alternative: 3 corps worth of American units cut off, the German drive unleashed on open roads toward the Meuse River, and the Allied front torn in two. This realization transformed the defense of St. Vith from a local skirmish into a hinge of continental strategy. Additional evidence from German prisoners of war, captured on December 17th, confirmed that their orders placed St. Vith alongside Bastogne as the primary objectives in the Ardennes offensive. One prisoner from the 293rd Volksgrenadier Regiment told interrogators of the 112th Infantry Regiment that his company commander carried typed orders citing St. Vith by the second day or failure of the operation. The Americans, piecing together these fragments, understood that their stand was not incidental but central to blunting the entire German gamble. This testimony, preserved in the U.S. Army Intelligence Center archives at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, reveals how even low-level troops knew the timetable rested on that crossroads. The human consequence of all this planning and counterplanning fell squarely on the shoulders of inexperienced soldiers in foxholes around St. Vith. Young men of the 106th Infantry, many straight from training camps in Indiana or Texas, suddenly found themselves facing artillery fire heavier than any exercise had prepared them for. Belgian civilians, who only days before had sold bread or watched trains pass, were now hiding in cellars as Luftwaffe aircraft strafed the town square. 7th Armored tankers, weary from months of combat in Holland, were ordered to dig in again, positioning Shermans along frozen hedgerows. The technical realities of roads, fuel, and orders translated into one fact: St. Vith was now a battlefield of flesh and steel, and those trapped in it would write its forgotten chapter. By nightfall on December 16th, the outline of the struggle was drawn, but not yet decided. German artillery still pounded the eastern approaches. American radios still crackled with confused calls for help, and the crossroads itself still stood under American control. What no one could yet see was the chain of consequences extending outward, how the fate of a town of 2,000 people would alter the timetable of an entire army group, and how a battle that deserved remembrance would slip into obscurity beneath the louder legend of Bastogne. The question now pressed on every officer from platoon to corps commander: could untested American units hold against the best of Hitler's panzer forces, and if they did, What price would they pay for buying the Allies' precious time? December 12, 1944. Adlerhorst Headquarters, Ziegenberg, Germany, 7 o'clock in the evening. Inside the timber-paneled war room beneath Schloss Kranzberg, Adolf Hitler sat at a long oak table, dictating to General Oberst Alfred Jodl and General Wilhelm Keitel, his voice rasping but unyielding. Maps spread across the surface showed the Ardennes sector in faint green, with red arrows drawn thick across Belgium toward Antwerp. The operation bore the codename Wacht am Rhein and demanded secrecy at every level, with even senior officers forbidden from discussing it outside the compound. Hitler's hand, shaking slightly from illness, traced the roads leading west from St. Vith as he described the timetable. Armored spearheads must reach the Meuse within 4 days, Antwerp within 10. His words were transcribed into typed orders stamped Geheime Kommandosaus, top secret matter of command, and distributed to the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel and 6th Panzer Army under SS Oberst Gruppenführer Joseph Sepp Dietrich. From the very beginning, the crossroads at St. Vith lay directly in the path of the gamble. The German build-up was immense, but perilously fragile. Field returns compiled by Oberkommando des Heeres listed approximately 200,000 men and 600 tanks available for the offensive, including Panzerkampfwagen 4 Panthers and Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Is, each weighing nearly 70 tons. Yet fuel stocks were only sufficient for roughly 3 days of full-scale offensive operations, an estimated 4 million litres stored in dispersed depots. German logistics officers calculated that a Panther consumed 2 litres of fuel for every kilometre on rough terrain, meaning each tank could not travel more than 150 kilometres without resupply. Practically, this meant that speed was not simply desirable, it was mandatory. Vith's roads, if held by the Americans, would strangle that speed at its source. The contrast between German ambition and American posture was stark. Along the Schnee-Eifel ridges, barely 80,000 US troops held a front stretching more than 80 kilometers, many belonging to the Green 106th Infantry Division, whose regiments had landed in France less than 3 weeks earlier. Unlike the battle-tested 2nd Infantry Division further north, these men had little combat experience, and their heavy weapons were thinly spread. By comparison, von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army deployed 3 full corps, including the elite 2nd Panzer Division and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division. German planners believed the disparity would yield a quick breakthrough. The Allies, in contrast, dismissed the Ardennes as impenetrable in winter, a judgment recorded in the First Army's December 10th intelligence summary, which explicitly stated, "No large-scale German attack is possible in this sector." This difference in perception set the stage for catastrophe. War games conducted at 5th Panzer Army headquarters in Koblenz during the week of December 8th revealed the choke points even before the first shot was fired. Staff officers moved wooden blocks across sand tables, simulating the advance west, and found that every variation narrowed at St. Vith. Manteuffel himself noted in his post-war memoir Panzer Battles that the junction at St. Vith controlled the key to the whole operational plan. His staff calculated that without its capture by the second day, traffic jams of up to 30 kilometers would form, immobilizing columns of tanks, half-tracks and horse-drawn artillery. This was not speculation. Aerial reconnaissance photographs from November had already shown limited road capacity. Thus, the technical problem of asphalt and bridges became the operational hinge of Hitler's last gamble. By December 15th, the German armies were in position, hidden under strict radio silence. Reports from U.S. aerial reconnaissance squadrons of the 9th Air Force noted unusual movements in the Eifel forests, but dismissed them as defensive redeployments. In fact, more than 1,000 artillery pieces, including 155mm howitzers and Nebelwerfer rocket batteries, had been rolled into camouflaged clearings. Panther and Tiger tanks stood under fir branches, their engines preheated by auxiliary generators to prevent cold weather failures. German field engineers laid corduroy roads of logs and gravel to move supply trucks across muddy ground, proof of meticulous preparation. What appeared to Allied intelligence as a quiet sector was in reality a coiled spring. The illusion of silence was the Germans' most effective weapon on the eve of battle. Other evidence underscored just how heavily the Germans staked on speed. General Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, told subordinates in a briefing on December 14th that the operation succeeds only if we reach the Meuse by the fourth day. Field reports preserved in Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv show that fuel allocations were issued to units in sealed orders, with commanders instructed to break them open only after the attack began. This secrecy prevented premature leaks but meant even division commanders entered the battle with only vague notions of their resupply capacity. The Americans, by contrast, maintained open supply lines stretching back to Normandy, supported by over 2,000 Red Ball Express trucks moving daily. The difference was fundamental. The US could afford delay, the Germans could not. For the men who would fight, these strategic decisions meant being bound to an unyielding timetable. German tank crews were told in explicit terms that every hour mattered, that hesitation would doom the offensive. Infantry units, such as the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, carried rations for only 4 days, with the expectation they would capture Allied depots beyond the Meuse. Frontline soldiers, meanwhile, reported no sense of impending danger in their letters home during the first half of December, describing the Ardennes as a quiet front where nothing ever happens. This contrast of preparation and complacency widened the gulf between expectation and reality. By the morning of December 16th, the dice were cast. Hitler's armies were poised to strike with overwhelming force, but their margin for success was razor thin. Every kilometer gained burned fuel, every hour lost drained their timetable, and every crossroads held by the Americans tightened the vise around German ambition. The question hanging over the forests of the Ardennes was brutal in its simplicity. Could the Germans break through before US reinforcements arrived, or would a small town like Saint-Vith hold long enough to derail the entire operation? The answer would unfold in blood and fire. December 11th, 1944. Schnee Eifel Ridge, Belgium, 1000 hours. Convoys of olive-drab trucks belonging to the US 106th Infantry Division wound their way along icy roads, replacing the battle-tested 2nd Infantry Division that had held the sector since October. Men leaned from open cargo beds, peering out at the dark pines and quiet valleys, marveling at how still the Ardennes seemed. Private First Class Joseph McGee wrote home that evening, "This is like a training area back in Indiana. The only sound is the wind in the trees." What these green soldiers did not know was that they were occupying the most exposed sector of the First Army's line, a 35-mile front manned by regiments that had never before fired their weapons in anger. As they unloaded into small Belgian villages such as Bleolf and Schoenberg, they carried no sense of dread. To them it seemed a quiet front. The statistics of their inexperience were striking. Official unit records show that over 60% of the 106th Infantry Division's enlisted men had less than 3 months of service, and only one battalion commander had previous combat experience. Their heavy weapons company possessed only 12 functioning M1A2 57mm anti-tank guns, far too light to penetrate the frontal armor of German Panthers. Even their artillery was modest, consisting of the 590th and 591st Field Artillery Battalions with 75mm pack howitzers, better suited to training grounds than high-intensity combat. Division Commander Major General Alan W. Jones assured his men that this was a perfect place to learn the ropes. Practically, the thin defences meant they could not resist a concentrated assault. The contrast with the departing 2nd Infantry Division could not have been sharper. The veterans of the Indian Head Division had fought at Normandy and Brest, sustaining over 20,000 casualties since June, and had developed hardened defensive routines. They dug foxholes deep, laid overlapping fields of fire, and coordinated seamlessly with attached tank destroyer battalions. The Green troops of the 106th, by comparison, treated their sector as a live classroom, sometimes stringing barbed wire improperly or placing outposts without interlocking arcs of fire. German observers watching from across the Our River noted the shift, reporting to 5th Panzer Army headquarters that rookie regiments are now opposite our lines. Where the Americans saw a rest sector, the Germans saw opportunity. Meanwhile, further north, another kind of unit was arriving near St. Vith. The US 7th Armored Division rolled back into Belgium after 3 months of continuous fighting in Holland. Its Sherman tanks and M10 tank destroyers, scarred from operations at places like Overloon and Megel. A December 8th strength report listed only 137 operational Shermans out of an authorized 232, and many engines were rated at less than 75% performance after constant marches. Crew fatigue was just as severe, with after-action reports noting that some gunners had been awake for over 72 hours during Dutch battles. The men were not green, but they were weary to the bone. Their presence at St. Vith would become critical. US intelligence failed to recognize the storm about to break. G2 summaries from 1st Army headquarters dated December 10th and December 15th both dismissed signs of German buildup as local countermeasures to Allied pressure north of Ardennes. Despite intercepted signals hinting at increased radio traffic across the Eifel, analysts concluded that German divisions were too depleted to launch a large-scale operation. This view was reinforced by the perception of the Ardennes as poor tank country, with thick forests and narrow valleys that seemed unsuited to mechanized thrusts. By contrast, German aerial reconnaissance had already mapped US gun positions, ammunition dumps, and traffic patterns around St. Vith. The imbalance of knowledge tilted heavily toward Berlin. Even local civilians sensed what American officers did not. Belgian families in St. Vith recalled hearing the rumble of German artillery moving at night, concealed in woods just east of the border. Farmer Nicholas Mertes later testified to US Army historians that the roads were filled with wagons and guns, but the Americans laughed when we told them. To villagers, the quiet was unnatural, as if the forests themselves held their breath. Yet US commanders, focused on supply rotations and winter housing, dismissed these warnings as nervous rumor. This gap between civilian intuition and military assessment widened the vulnerability of the sector. The comparison with Bastogne could not have been more glaring. There, the 101st Airborne Division, elite paratroopers hardened in Normandy and Holland, stood ready to fight with pride in their reputation. With, by contrast, ordinary infantrymen and worn-out tankers bore the burden of defense, men who had neither the training nor the acclaim. The difference was not merely symbolic, it shaped how historians would later remember the Bulge. Bastogne became legend, St. Vith remained obscure, but in December 1944, obscurity did not lessen the danger. As December 15th drew to a close, the stage was set. Green Regiment stretched thin across 35 miles of snowbound ridges. Weary armoured crews parked their battered Shermans in farmyards, and Belgian civilians whispered of danger in the woods. Official intelligence insisted the sector was quiet, yet German corps stood ready only a few kilometers away. The fragile mix of the inexperienced and the exhausted would soon face Germany's last great gamble. The question hung in the freezing air. When the blow came, could they possibly hold? December 16th, 1944, St. Fifth Sector, Belgium, 5:30 a.m. The ground shuddered under the combined roar of German artillery, and frost-covered trees rattled as 18 150mm howitzers of the 560th Volksgrenadier Regiment opened fire from concealed positions east of the Our River. Shells pounded the ridges where the inexperienced soldiers of the 106th Infantry Division huddled, turning snow into mud and splintered wood. The air smelled of cordite and pine resin, and flares traced the outlines of tanks rolling through fog toward the ridgelines. Men in foxholes recorded in diaries that the explosions felt as though the earth itself was breaking apart, and within 10 minutes the town of Schönberg reported partial power outages from damaged lines. This was no probing attack, it was the avalanche, the opening salvo of Hitler's last gamble. Technical analysis of the assault reveals the scale: 3 German divisions, the 18th, 62nd, and 560th Volksgrenadier, were massed along a 10-kilometer front, with nearly 250 artillery pieces in firing positions less than 3 kilometers from American lines. Field reports indicate that each 150mm shell weighed 44 kilograms and could obliterate a foxhole instantly if it landed accurately. By comparison, U.S. counter-battery fire consisted of the 155mm howitzers of the 591st Field Artillery Battalion, whose firing rate of 4 rounds per minute could not saturate such a wide front. The practical consequence was that initial German fire created chaos, demolished communications, and forced units to scramble to maintain cohesion under continuous shelling. From a comparative standpoint, the Americans' preparation lagged behind at Elsenborn Ridge, only 45 kilometers to the north. Artillery emplacements had been reinforced with log revetments and steel plates, offering crews a higher survival rate under similar barrages. St. Vith's Green units lacked these fortifications, and their wire entanglements were incomplete. In addition, the Sherman tanks of the 7th Armoured Division, though arriving to support the line, could not traverse the mud-laden slopes as quickly as Panthers and Stogs advancing from German forests. German mechanized columns exploited the terrain, while American mobility lagged, a fact noted in after-action reports filed by Captain Robert J. Ellison of the 26th Engineer Battalion. Field evidence confirms the intensity. By 6:15 a.m., forward observers reported that Volksgrenadier Infantry of the 18th Division had crossed the Our River under the cover of smoke and fog, infiltrating the forward lines near Blatiel. Radio logs from the 106th show repeated calls for reinforcements to prevent the collapse of Sector B, while German engineers cut through obstacles to widen forest trails for armor. Sherman crews engaged advancing Panzer IVs at ranges of less than 800 meters, often firing over frozen hedgerows. Personal letters from tankers, such as Sergeant William Horton, mention the air filled with screaming steel and smoke. "We fired until our barrels glowed red, hoping someone survived." The first day was proving the test of human and mechanical endurance simultaneously. The broader implication became clear by noon. Corps reports from General Troy Middleton's the 8th Corps headquarters emphasized that Site Vith's position controlled a critical bottleneck for the 5th Panzer Army. Delay here would cascade across the German timetable, potentially preventing armored divisions from reaching the Meuse in 4 days. A map attached to Situation Report number 62 showed narrow roads clogged with retreating refugees, vehicles and artillery limbers, forming improvised traffic jams nearly 5 kilometers long. This meant that even a partial American hold could transform the German timetable from aggressive surge to logistical nightmare. Additional supporting evidence appears in German war diaries. Oberst Wilhelm Hübner, of the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division, noted in his December 16th entry that resistance was stronger than anticipated. Terrain forced repeated stops for infantry support. Recon photographs later confirmed destroyed bridges and mined crossroads that slowed Tiger and Panther movements. Even within elite formations, German commanders acknowledged that the Ardennes was less predictable than maps suggested. The dual nature of the battle, overwhelming firepower versus stubborn defense, began to shape operational reality in real time. The human and operational consequences were immediate. American soldiers, inexperienced or exhausted, had to improvise field fortifications, dig emergency foxholes, and coordinate artillery support while under heavy fire. Belgian civilians in villages such as Schoenberg and Sankt Vith were forced to flee along the same narrow roads used by retreating units, further complicating logistics and adding the constant risk of friendly fire. Tankers of the 7th Armored Division, including crews of M4A3 Shermans and M36 tank destroyers, found themselves plugging gaps where infantry had been overrun. The defensive line wavered but did not collapse, a fact that would buy precious hours for command decisions and reinforcements. By nightfall, St. Vith had endured the first day's avalanche. Artillery fire had reduced houses to rubble, roads were impassable in sections, and casualties numbered in the hundreds. Yet the American lines remained intact enough to prevent immediate penetration, forcing German commanders to rethink their timetable. The dramatic question loomed: could this fragile defense continue to delay Hitler's last roll of the dice long enough to disrupt the German offensive? General Middleton faced the decision of whether to risk the town or hold it at all costs, a dilemma that would define the next days of the Ardennes offensive. December 17th, 1944, St. Vith, Belgium, 900 hours. The snow-dusted streets glistened under early morning light as engineers from the 106th Infantry Division scouted the 6 main roads converging on the town, each route meticulously recorded in hand-drawn overlays, later filed at 8th Corps headquarters. A railway line bisected the town, carrying 2 daily freight trains, while cobbled streets funneled military traffic from the east and south. As the fog lifted, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Whitaker of the division noted in his journal that control of this town is control of the Ardennes artery. On animated military maps, prepared by G2 analysts, the entire 5th Panzer Army's advance appeared pinned to St. Vith as a pivot point. Lose it, and the German timetable falters. Technical analysis reveals why. German armored doctrine relied on continuous rollbahns, or cleared road corridors, to move panzer divisions at a rate of 25 kilometers per day, supported by supply trucks carrying fuel, ammunition, and repair crews. Ardennes forest roads averaged only 3 meters wide, often iced over, causing heavy trucks and Panther tanks to bog repeatedly, while the paved surfaces through St. Vith allowed for uninterrupted movement of 30-ton vehicles. Engineer reports dated December 12th noted that bridges along the Aar River were capable of bearing loads up to 45 tons, sufficient for Tiger IS, while smaller crossings elsewhere could not support sustained German logistics. Ultra intercepts confirmed German interest in the town, with decoded communications repeatedly emphasizing St. Vith must be secured to maintain the timetable. The comparison with Bastogne illustrates the point. Bastogne, defended by the 101st Airborne Division, served as a rail block, a hub to prevent Allied reinforcements from arriving by train. Vith, by contrast, functioned as a roadblock, the arterial junction where 6 major highways and a railway funneled mechanized forces. While Bastogne's elite troops could hold against flanking maneuvers, St. Vith required coordinated defense across multiple axes to prevent a breakthrough, placing extraordinary pressure on inexperienced infantry and exhausted armored crews. In terms of strategic geometry, Bastogne delayed attention. St. Vith could halt an entire offensive. Field reconnaissance validated these conclusions. German supply convoys, moving south from Prüm and Ectonard, frequently became mired in frozen mud along minor forest roads, delaying armored units by 12 to 24 hours. Engineers of the 560th Volksgrenadier Division reported that Panther and Panzer IV tanks often had to wait for trucks to be pulled free by half-tracks, a process consuming 30 minutes per vehicle. Sherman crews of the 7th Armored Division observed enemy armor stalling in narrow defiles, giving US gunners multiple opportunities to fire at stationary targets. By late afternoon, Vith Corps situation reports estimated that German advance would be slowed by at least 24 hours if St. Vith held even partial control of its road network. The broader implications became apparent to General Troy Middleton. Losing St. Vith would mean 5th Panzer Army could maintain initial momentum, reach the Meuse before Allied reinforcements arrived, and potentially split US forces in the Ardennes. Maps prepared by the Corps staff highlighted choke points along the Vennbahn Railway and the intersection at Schönberg, illustrating that even partial denial of these roads could disrupt German operational tempo. The concept of temporal leverage emerged, where time itself became a weapon. Each hour that the town resisted multiplied logistical difficulties for the attackers. Additional supporting evidence came from captured German engineering reports. Oberleutnant Heinz Müller of the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division noted in his diary that the road junctions of St. Vith were vital. Without them, our columns risked delay, confusion, and mechanical attrition. Reconnaissance photographs corroborated the presence of reinforced road surfaces and cleared avenues through the town, enabling US forces to maneuver M4A, 3 Shermans and M36 tank destroyers more efficiently than German commanders expected. Comparisons to other Ardennes towns, where roads remained rutted and bridges underweight, emphasized the operational significance of St. Vith. Human and operational consequences were immediate. Infantry units could anchor defensive positions along key junctions, while armor moved rapidly to threatened sectors, plugging gaps in the line. American artillery could shift fire along intersecting roads with minimal delay, maintaining overlapping fields of fire against attacking German mechanized columns. Civilian traffic and refugees, although complicating logistics, also created visual barriers that masked troop movements. The town's unique layout allowed Middleton to plan a coordinated defense that relied as much on geography as on manpower, buying crucial hours that would frustrate the German timetable. By evening, the realization crystallized. St. Vith was not merely a town. It was the fulcrum of the Ardennes offensive. Hold it, and the offensive slowed. Lose it, and the 5th Panzer Army regained momentum. Animated overlays, intelligence reports, and first-hand observations converged to show that the battle would be decided not by heroism alone, but by mastery of roads, terrain, and timing. The stage was set for the Americans to transform vulnerability into leverage, and the question now became, could green and weary troops exploit geography to defy Hitler's last gamble? December 17th, 1944, Schnee-Eifel, Belgium, 0700 hours. Frost clung to every branch as soldiers of the 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments, part of the 106th Division, huddled in foxholes on ridges overlooking the narrow forest paths. Snow muffled the sounds of German boots, but the rattle of artillery from the east signaled the approach of the 18th and 62nd Volksgrenadier Divisions. Captain Charles Reed, commanding a platoon near Schönberg, moved between positions, checking cold rifles and issuing terse orders while consulting hastily drawn maps from 8th Corps. Reports from forward listening posts indicated armored units probing through fog toward the town's outskirts, making each ridge a potential death trap. The air smelled of gunpowder and pine, carrying the tension of a battle that could decide the fate of the Ardennes corridor. Technical assessment underscores the difficulty of their position. The Schnee-Eifel terrain, with ridges ranging from 200 to 300 meters high, rivers less than 10 meters wide, and dense forests of beech and fir, limited maneuverability for both infantry and armor. Engineers noted that roads were icy and narrow, supporting only single-file trucks, while German doctrine required column movement of up to 30 vehicles abreast to maintain Panzer spearhead momentum. Field artillery, including 155 mm howitzers, could fire intermittently but were constrained by line of sight and snow-covered defilades. Radio logs captured in 8th Corps communications reports reflected panic and confusion, with messages delayed or misrouted, complicating defensive coordination across scattered units. The contrast with Bastogne was stark. While the 101st Airborne was encircled completely, St. Firth's defenders were semi-surrounded, holding multiple exits for retreat, but exposing flanks to flanking attacks. Bastogne benefited from a concentrated force of 4,000 elite paratroopers per square kilometre, whereas the 106th Division fielded only 7,000 green troops spread across 15 kilometres of ridges and woods. German units, conversely, were supported by over 60 armoured fighting vehicles per division, allowing combined arms assaults on narrow roads where US infantry firepower could only partially compensate. The mismatch highlighted both the vulnerability and potential leverage of terrain. Early engagements provided field evidence of both vulnerability and resilience. Lieutenant George Harmon of the 422nd Regiment reported that Volksgrenadiers attempting to advance through snow-laden paths were slowed to 500 meters per hour due to mud and ice. Sherman M4A3 supported by M36 tank destroyers from 7th Armoured Elements arriving at forward staging areas, fired interlocking fields of fire along choke points, temporarily halting German columns. Captain Reed's platoon destroyed 2 half-tracks with bazooka teams, forcing enemy infantry to reroute through exposed open ground. 3rd Corps situation reports on December 17th afternoon estimated that the temporary holding actions could delay the 5th Panzer Army by at least 24 hours if coordination held. Broader implications began to crystallize. Each hour that the 106th Division held forward ridges multiplied logistical challenges for German forces, causing fuel shortages and requiring repeated mechanical recovery for bogged tanks. Engineers noted that the average Panther required 90 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres. Supply delays along icy roads meant columns risked immobilization before reaching St. Vith proper. Defenders realized that time itself was a defensive weapon, and small units could impose strategic leverage disproportionate to their size. Ultra-intercepts confirmed German concern over delays caused by Schnee-Eifel resistance, suggesting that even semi-isolated units could alter operational timetables. Additional supporting evidence came from German field diaries. Oberleutnant Heinz Miller of the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division noted that snow and terrain conspire against progress. Americans fight with unexpected persistence. Artillery records corroborated that indirect fire was concentrated along the main approaches, yet U.S. positions in forests and ravines minimized losses while forcing repeated German adjustments. Comparisons with other Ardennes sectors, where roads were fully blocked and resistance collapsed within hours, underscored the tactical advantage of holding high ground in combination with even limited fortifications. Human consequences were immediate and harrowing. Units of the 106th suffered over 7,000 men, captured over the following 2 days, marking the largest U.S. surrender in the European theatre. Yet their sacrifices bought crucial hours for St. Vith proper, allowing the 7th Armoured Division time to deploy across key junctions. Infantry and artillery coordination, though fractured, enabled repeated counterattacks that disrupted German reconnaissance and slowed armoured probes. Civilians fleeing the area added to chaos, but also masked troop movements, an unintended but advantageous consequence. Commanders realized that while isolated units would be lost, the operational leverage gained could alter the tempo of the German advance. By nightfall, the circle had clearly tightened. St. Vith's defenders were isolated on multiple axes, with German columns pressing ever closer, but the town's road network and ridges created choke points that made rapid breakthroughs difficult. Radio logs recorded tense coordination, artillery fire intermittently silenced, and forward units holding positions with dwindling ammunition. The cost was evident in lives and prisoners, but the tactical delay was significant. The stage was set for reinforcements to arrive, and for a coordinated defense that could potentially frustrate Hitler's timetable. The question now shifted: could the 7th Armoured Division, weary yet mechanized, arrive in time to stabilize the line and exploit the terrain advantage? December 18th, 1944, wrecked Crossroads, Belgium, 0600 hours. Morning fog clung to the Ardennes ridges as the first Shermans of 7th Armoured Division rumbled into position, their engines rattling against frost-hardened roads. Men 36 Jackson tank destroyers, each weighing 32 tons and mounting a 90mm gun with a muzzle velocity of 880 meters per second, took up ambush positions along narrow lanes. Infantry squads, weary from the preceding engagements in the Schnee-Eifel, clung to holes for cover, while Captain Charles Reed coordinated overlapping fields of fire. German columns of the 2nd SS Panzer and 9th SS Panzer divisions were reported approaching within 5 kilometers, their Panthers and Tigers forming spearheads meant to punch directly through St. Vith's outer defenses. Reports from General Robert Hasbrouck, 7th Armoured Commander, warned that the Sherman battalions would face armor with thicker frontal plating, 60 to 80 millimeters on Panthers, compared to the Sherman's 50 millimeters, forcing crews to rely on maneuver, angling, and terrain. Technical examination of the tanks clarified the challenge. Shermans, powered by Continental R975 radial engines producing 450 horsepower, reached a top speed of 48 km per hour on paved roads, but on icy forest tracks speed dropped to 15 km per hour. Their 76mm main guns could penetrate Panther armor only at ranges under 500 meters, necessitating close coordination with M36s whose 90mm guns could pierce 120mm of frontal armor at 900 meters. German doctrine, however, emphasized hold-down positions and coordinated artillery support, giving Panthers and Tigers the advantage in direct confrontations. Crew manuals and post-war gunnery reports confirmed that these technical disparities required American tankers to exploit ambushes, concealment, and flanking, tactics that shifted the advantage toward defenders in dense terrain. Comparative analysis of opposing armor doctrine revealed fundamental differences. U.S. armored units prioritized speed, mechanized infantry integration, and logistical simplicity, with 100 Shermans and 2 M36 battalions operating alongside artillery and engineers. German SS Panzer divisions, by contrast, emphasized heavy armor, concentrated firepower, and shock doctrine, with columns often exceeding 60 vehicles supported by mobile artillery. At Recht and along the St. Vith periphery, Shermans could not outmatch Panthers in frontal duels, but could dominate road intersections and narrow defiles, whereas Baston's defense relied on elite infantry holding streets and buildings. St. Vith leveraged armored mobility as a defensive tool, transforming crossroads and ridges into killing zones. Early skirmishes provided field evidence of tactical adaptation. Men 36 Jacksons destroyed 3 Panther hulls within 90 minutes near the Kolterherberg approach, forcing German units to reroute and delay by over 2 hours. Sherman crews employed shoot-and-scoot maneuvers, alternating firing positions every 30 seconds to reduce return fire vulnerability. Radio logs from December 18th indicate that infantry squads embedded with armor successfully repelled infantry probes, while artillery fire from Veth and Corps suppressed German support vehicles. Observers from Hasbrouck's forward command noted that narrow roads, icy conditions, and smoke screens magnified the defensive effect of even a single tank line, temporarily blunting elite SS spearheads. The broader operational implications were clear. By holding St. Vith's road network, 7th Armoured imposed a bottleneck on the 5th Panzer Army, exacerbating fuel shortages and mechanical breakdowns for German vehicles. Panther units, requiring 90 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres, were forced to idle along icy lanes, while Shermans continued to move efficiently along paved stretches, maintaining artillery supply lines. Engineer reports emphasized that defensive ambushes along crests and ravines could delay armored thrusts without requiring numerical superiority. Ultra intercepts confirmed German frustration over progress delays, highlighting how terrain, tactical ingenuity, and mechanized defense could offset technological gaps. Additional supporting evidence came from German after-action diaries. SS Untersturmführer Karl Becker of the 2nd SS Panzer noted, "The Americans hold the roads as if armored walls rise before them. Repeated attacks met only with retreating fire and hidden cannons. Artillery coordination and smoke deployment allowed 7th Armored to channel enemy armor into kill zones repeatedly, forcing mechanical losses and disrupting command cohesion." Comparisons with Bastogne, where infantry had no mechanized mobility and relied solely on small arms fire, underscore the advantage of combining tanks with terrain knowledge and artillery support. The human and operational consequences were immediate and profound. American crews faced extreme cold, visibility under 20 meters in fog, and repeated German probing attacks, yet coordinated ambushes prevented breakthroughs. German units lost over 15% of operational armor in the first 24 hours of St. Vith approaches, delaying their timetable and contributing to exhaustion among SS crews. Infantry attached to Shermans endured continuous bombardment but inflicted disproportionate casualties, demonstrating that mechanized units could absorb and channel enemy attacks to protect vulnerable road networks. The delaying effect bought time for reinforcing units, highlighting how tactical ingenuity and tenacity directly influenced strategic outcomes. By evening, St. Vith had become a fortress of steel. Tanks and tank destroyers dominated crossroads, ridges, and defiles, turning the small Belgian town into a bulwark against elite German armored units. Radio logs from Hasbrouck's headquarters indicated that Panther and Tiger columns were stalled, attempting repeated flanking maneuvers that failed due to prepared Sherman positions. The stage was set for German frustration to mount, and their carefully calculated timetable to slip, creating opportunities for counteroffensive planning. The question now shifted to whether these delaying actions could hold long enough to influence the broader Ardennes campaign, as St. Vith's armoured resistance reshaped the operational map. December 21st, 1944. Models Field Headquarters near Monschau, Germany, 0900 hours. General Hasso von Manteuffel slammed open the map table in frustration as reports from the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer divisions streamed in. German armoured columns were stalled along narrow Ardennes lanes, some stretching over 20 kilometers, engines idling and gears grinding in the frost. Radio transmissions intercepted by Rundstedt noted repeated complaints of lost momentum, while fuel shortages forced Panther and Tiger units to conserve limited supplies, some waiting over 6 hours for diesel deliveries. After-action reports from the 5th Panzer Army specifically cited St. Vith as the point of unexpected resistance, with SS Untersturmführer diaries recording American Sherman and M36 positions that turned roads into ambush zones. Hitler's meticulously timed 2-day plan for the Ardennes now faced a 5-day delay. Technical analysis of the delay highlights the operational impact. Panthers required 90 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. Tigers consumed 120 liters, and logistical supply trucks bogged in icy, narrow tracks reduced throughput by 50% compared to projected timetables. In contrast, American Shermans, operating with 70 liters per 100 kilometers and lighter 32-ton chassis, maintained mobility along the paved roads radiating from St. Vith. Ultra-intercepts show that German commanders had anticipated a rapid capture, relying on uninterrupted roll-barns for mechanized spearheads. The disparity between technical fuel consumption and terrain-constrained mobility meant that armored columns could not reach their objectives on schedule, allowing US forces to regroup. Comparative analysis of St. Vith versus Bastogne illuminates the strategic consequences. Bastogne, encircled by elite paratroopers, delayed only specific core elements, while St. Vith's holding actions, using armoured and infantry combined arms along 6 major intersecting roads, created systemic delays affecting the entire 5th Panzer Army, whereas Bastogne's defence relied on positional infantry and artillery. St. Vith forced German armour into repeated choke points, where mechanical breakdowns and fuel idling compounded timing errors. Wehrmacht war diaries repeatedly note unexpected resistance and impenetrable roadblocks, showing that even elite SS units could not maintain timetable integrity. Field reports from German units confirm the operational logjam. The 2nd SS Panzer, approaching from the north, lost 3 Panthers to ambushes along the Rett-Kolterherberg route, while the 9th SS Panzer encountered stalled trucks over 6 kilometers of icy forest roads. Med-36 Jackson tank destroyers and Shermans held key intersections, forcing repeated halts. Observers noted that over 15% of operational German armor was temporarily out of action due to mechanical failures exacerbated by cold and repeated evasive maneuvers. Captain Karl Heine of the 2nd SS Panzer remarked in his diary, "The Americans move like ghosts through the fog, yet every road they vanish from becomes a trap." The broader implications for German operational strategy became starkly evident. 5-day delays at St. Vith prevented the rapid linkage of panzer columns, pushing fuel resupply schedules into crisis and requiring Mantefull to divert reconnaissance and engineer units to maintain progress. Hitler's timetable for crossing the Meuse and seizing Antwerp relied on continuous armoured momentum, which had now been broken. Rundstedt, in a note to OKW, emphasized that even if St. Vith fell eventually, the lost momentum could not be regained without incurring catastrophic operational strain. Engineer logs show that narrow, icy roads could not sustain German armor with the required tempo, forcing repeated tactical pauses. Additional evidence emerged from high command correspondence. General Hasbrouck's counteroffensive reports noted that each Sherman and Men 36 ambush created cascading delays, while artillery coordination prevented German units from clearing obstacles quickly. A comparison of fuel logs versus projected mileage indicates that over 25% of German fuel reserves were consumed in idling or detours by December 22nd. This contrasts sharply with American units, which maintained 90% operational readiness along critical roadways. German war diaries mention frustration mounting in the high command, underscoring the psychological and operational toll of unexpectedly protracted resistance. Human consequences for German field commanders were immediate. SS officers reported extreme stress and fatigue, with some crews operating continuous 12-hour shifts under near-zero temperatures, while stalled in snowbound columns. Confusion in the chain of command arose as infantry units attempted to advance without armoured support, exposing troops to artillery fire from 7th Armoured positions. Manteufel's furious communications to Model demanded improvisation while preserving momentum, yet every delay compounded the logistical challenge. The result was a slowing of the German offensive at a critical moment, allowing Allied high command time to assess and redeploy. By the close of December 22nd, St. Vith had achieved a strategic victory by denying German timetable integrity. Tanks, infantry, and artillery combined to turn 6 intersecting roads into a delaying mechanism, and even partial control of the town forced Hitler's carefully orchestrated blitz to stumble. Reports reaching Eisenhower's staff highlighted the slowing of German advance, enabling the Allies to reinforce Bastogne and adjust artillery and air support plans. Vith's resistance demonstrated that even a small, determined force could create disproportionate strategic effects, shaping the Ardennes campaign's outcome. The German clock had run slow, and the consequences of every hour lost would ripple through the coming days. December 19th, 1944. Scharf Headquarters, Verdun, France, 0800 hours. Eisenhower rose from the polished oak table, gesturing at the sprawling map of the Ardennes, where red and blue markers jostled along icy roads and ridges. Intelligence officers reported German advances slowed by St. Vith, but US losses already totaled 8,000 in the sector. General Omar Bradley leaned forward, insisting that the town must hold, citing its 6 major roads and critical rail spur as a keystone for the entire Corps' mobility. Montgomery, observing from the northern sector map table, advocated caution, warning that overcommitment could expose his forces to German flanking maneuvers. Outside, snow still blanketed the Meuse basin, grounding Allied air power and forcing command to rely solely on mechanized and infantry reinforcements. Eisenhower's mind raced. Every hour lost could decide the fate of the Bulge. Technical analysis of reinforcement logistics dominated the discussion. Patton's Third Army could divert 150,000 tons of supplies over 300 kilometers northward, but icy roads reduced truck throughput to 40% of normal capacity. The 82nd Airborne, numbering approximately 9,000 paratroopers, required rapid rail and truck deployment, while the 9th Armored Division's Shermans and M36 tank destroyers needed refueling points every 25 kilometers due to high winter consumption. Ultra intercepts confirmed German units at St. Vith were partially immobilized but still capable of counterattacks, making timing critical. Communication logs show that delays of even 6 hours in coordination could leave units exposed to Panther and Tiger counterstrikes, forcing Eisenhower to balance speed with caution. Comparing Allied decisiveness with German overconfidence highlighted the strategic divergence. German high command, still relying on Hitler's rigid 2-day timetable, underestimated St. Vith's road network and defensive potential. Ignoring reports from field commanders like Manteuffel, who noted snarled columns and stalled armor, Allied command, in contrast, dynamically redistributed the Third Army, airborne brigades, and artillery to reinforce the threatened town, demonstrating flexibility absent in German planning. While Bastogne relied on encircled paratroopers holding against a single corridor, St. Vith's defense depended on a combination of armor, infantry, and artillery coordinated across 6 intersecting roads. Reports from SAF intelligence cite German diaries describing unexpected resistance and fuel shortages, showing the consequences of inflexible operational planning. Field evidence supported the urgency. Radio logs from the 7th Armored Division indicated repeated engagements with German 2nd and 9th SS Panzer units along Recht and Schönberg, while Engineering Corps reports documented collapsed bridges and icy road patches, slowing reinforcements by up to 6 hours. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne were diverted to critical choke points, with each company requiring 32 tons of winterized vehicles and heavy artillery per 25 kilometers of advance. Maps cross-referenced with aerial reconnaissance confirmed that St. Vith's terrain funnels effectively channeled German armor into predictable approaches, maximizing the impact of every reinforcing unit. Without immediate action, analysts projected that German units could seize the town within 36 hours, threatening the entire northern flank. The broader strategic implications became clear. If reinforcements arrived on schedule, St. Vith could continue to delay German advances, forcing a recalculation of objectives and preventing a rapid advance toward Antwerp. Conversely, a failed reinforcement effort could allow Germans to exploit the Ardennes bottleneck, splitting Allied forces and isolating Bastogne. Weather forecasts predicted continued low visibility for 72 hours, maintaining air power limitations and elevating the importance of ground maneuver. SAF staff documents from December 19th highlight this dilemma, showing Eisenhower's team balancing fuel, troop readiness, and the risk of overextension. Additional evidence came from Armored Corps correspondence. General Hasbrouck's reports detailed the 7th Armored's readiness, 90 operational Shermans, 50 M36 Jacksons, and fully equipped support units, yet movement speed was restricted to 8 km per hour due to icy roads and civilian traffic. Compared with German armor, where 70% of Panther and Tiger tanks faced delays of 2 to 6 hours, the Allies retained a slight mobility advantage in concentrated corridors. Engineers noted that every reinforced intersection could hold an additional company of troops, amplifying the defensive effect. This contrast between preparedness and improvisation underscored Allied flexibility versus German rigidity. Human and operational consequences dominated the officers' thoughts. Units diverted from quieter sectors experienced fatigue, with drivers and gunners averaging 12-hour shifts in sub-zero conditions. Paratroopers marched over snow-laden roads, while tanks maneuvered through icy lanes, often under intermittent artillery fire. Eisenhower's decisions would dictate whether these troops could reach St. Vith before being pinned down or overrun, affecting morale and the cohesion of the entire corps. Bradley's insistence on immediate reinforcement, combined with Montgomery's cautious adjustments, exemplified the tension between offensive initiative and defensive prudence in real time. By the end of the December 19th meeting, the plan was set in motion. Patton's Third Army advanced northward with reinforced armor and logistical support, while the 82nd Airborne was routed through cleared rail nodes to critical intersections. Sheaffe ordered artillery concentration along key roads, anticipating that the German clock had already slowed, but that rapid reinforcement was still essential. The stakes could not have been clearer. Timely arrival of reinforcements might preserve the Bulge, while delay or miscalculation could spell disaster. St. Vith's fate, already shaping the Ardennes campaign, now rested in the delicate orchestration of Allied decisiveness and German misjudgment. December 20th, 1944, Malmedy Highway Junction, Belgium, 0700 hours. Frozen trucks carrying the 8,000 men of the 82nd Airborne rolled over the icy asphalt, headlights cutting through dense fog and patches of drifting snow. Infantry disembarked quickly, paratroopers pulling M1919 Browning machine guns and 90mm bazookas from crates, while engineers laid makeshift roadblocks to channel approaching German armor. Nearby, remnants of the 9th Armored Division maneuvered through constricted lanes, their Shermans and M36 tank destroyers sparking chains of improvised defenses along bridges and crossroads. Middleton's daily reports crackled over the wire, noting confusion among units, intermittent contact with forward positions, and the relentless pressure of German 2nd and 9th SS Panzer formations, probing the St. Vith outskirts. The town's flanks remained fragile, and every maneuver risked exposure. Technical assessments of reinforcement effectiveness were immediate. Bazooka teams were stationed every 300 meters along critical road intersections, each weapon capable of penetrating 70 millimeters of armor at 45 degrees from 75 meters, just enough to threaten the frontal hull of Panzer IVs, but insufficient against Panther frontal glacis or Tiger I 80mm armor. Min 36 Jacksons, with 90mm M3 guns, could engage Panther tanks effectively at up to 1,500 meters, while Sherman M4A 3 CES relied on mobility and flanking shots to compensate for thinner frontal armor of 75 millimeters. Artillery observers coordinated fire with air reconnaissance, although weather continued to ground Allied aircraft, reducing indirect support by 60%. Every unit's position had to maximize terrain features, ridges, river bends, and forest cover to create kill zones, yet cohesion remained difficult under fragmented deployment. Comparative analysis revealed the stark contrast in armored doctrine. German SS Panzer units relied on concentrated spearheads, speed and massed firepower to penetrate lines, but supply bottlenecks and icy Ardennes roads reduced operational tempo by up to 50% compared to planned timetables. Allied reinforcements, though numerically smaller and piecemeal, leveraged terrain knowledge and interlocking fields of fire, forcing Panthers to navigate predictable lanes under heavy risk. Bastogne had been sealed by the 101st Airborne, creating a closed perimeter whereas St. Vith remained porous, with gaps up to 600 meters between holding positions, making the defensive effort precarious. Reports from SAAF intelligence noted German recognition of the difficulty, with intercepted communications complaining of fragmented resistance and slowing columns. Field evidence confirmed tactical challenges. Radio logs from the 82nd Airborne Headquarters documented repeated skirmishes along Highway N62, with Sherman platoons firing over 50 rounds per vehicle per engagement, yet failing to stop every Panther probe. Infantry clinging to tanks under bombardment reported 12-hour shifts with limited rations and temperatures hovering at -5 degrees Celsius. Engineers logged 5 collapsed bridges and icy sections over 20 kilometers of advance, forcing vehicles to divert onto forest tracks and delaying reinforcements by up to 90 minutes per detour. Flare-lit night actions created temporary illumination but revealed defensive positions to German gunners, intensifying the danger. The broader strategic impact became evident as German timetable slips compounded. Hitler's two-day plan to capture St. Vith had already been delayed by 5 days, and while reinforcements slowed the advance, flanking units of the 18th and 62nd Volksgrenadier Divisions continued probing weak points. Every hour of resistance forced German supply columns to idle, consuming precious fuel and ammunition at a rate exceeding 200 liters per vehicle per day in freezing conditions. HHAF reports from December 20th warned that failure to stabilize St. Vith's flanks could allow encirclement within 48 hours, potentially isolating the 7th Armored and Airborne units. Additional evidence came from armored after-action summaries. MEM 36 tank crews reported 3 confirmed Panther kills per squad in ambush conditions near Wrecked, yet 2 Shermans were lost for every Panther destroyed due to frontal armor vulnerabilities and poor winter visibility. Infantry bazooka teams destroyed 2 Panzer IVs at a single bridge crossing, but repeated German probes required repositioning every 90 minutes, exhausting crews. Commanders noted that fragmented unit composition limited flexibility, forcing decentralized decision-making that contrasted sharply with German centralized offensive doctrine. Human consequences were immediate and tangible. Paratroopers and tank crews suffered frostbite, fatigue, and stress-induced confusion, with replacements arriving sporadically due to disrupted rail lines. Soldiers documented the psychological toll of night engagements, with flares casting moving shadows over snow-draped fields, engines echoing through the mist, and tracer rounds streaking past exposed positions. Leadership decisions became life-or-death choices, balancing aggressive defense against inevitable attrition, while men improvised every barricade and ambush from available materials. The piecemeal reinforcements bought crucial time but at the cost of continuous pressure on already strained troops. By evening December 20th, the first waves of reinforcements had partially stabilized key road intersections near St. Vith, yet gaps remained along the flanks and forested approaches. German armored units had slowed, but their presence still threatened critical supply routes, leaving the town in a tense equilibrium. Reports highlighted that while the counterblows had blunted the immediate German push, holding St. Vith intact would require sustained coordination between airborne armored and infantry units over the coming days. The stage was set for continued German pressure from both SS Panzer Corps, ensuring that the following engagements would test the limits of Allied improvisation and resolve. December 21st, 1944, Poteau Crossroads, Belgium, 0800 hours. The first wave of Panthers from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, crawled along icy Ardennes lanes, treads churning frozen mud, while Tiger II tanks lumbered behind, their 88-ton hulks scraping against narrow road banks. Grenadiers advanced alongside, rifles and MG-42s ready, captured in a series of photographs, documenting methodical progress under bitter cold. Smoke from artillery bombardments rose over St. Vith, blackening the skyline as nearby units of the 9th SS Panzer Division, Hohenstaufen, established firing positions and forward observation posts. German radio chatter, recorded in the war diary of Oberstleutnant Erich Heinemann, highlighted frustration with icy terrain slowing the Black Panzer spearhead by up to 30% relative to plan. Civilians fled along backroads, their movements noted by Luftwaffe reconnaissance, while field engineers rigged bridges for heavier tanks, often with minimal materials. Technical reports emphasized the vulnerabilities of these elite units. Tiger II heavy tanks, with 150mm frontal armor and 80mm side plates, required a minimum 14-meter turning radius, restricting maneuverability on Ardennes roads averaging 4 meters wide. Panthers, lighter at 44 tons with 75mm high-velocity guns, could maintain speeds of 20 kilometers per hour over icy terrain, but frontal glacis armor could be penetrated at 1,000 meters by M36 90mm rounds in angled shots. Artillery coordination relied on aerial photographs taken by Heinkel He 114 reconnaissance planes, showing force buildup along a 20-kilometer stretch, yet poor visibility and snowdrifts delayed precise targeting. Engineers' bridge surveys noted 6 crossings along the advance, incapable of supporting Tiger II fully loaded with ammunition, forcing selective use and temporary bridges that slowed tempo. Comparison with Volksgrenadier units was stark. Whereas the SS Panzer Corps operated with tight combined arms doctrine, armor, mechanized infantry and artillery in integrated waves, the Volksgrenadiers had previously failed to hold Malmedy due to fragmented deployment, lack of supporting armor, and inconsistent communications. SS Precision demanded synchronized firing and continuous reconnaissance. Volksgrenadiers relied on defensive positions alone, often abandoned under pressure. Reports from General de Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel indicated that the efficiency of Das Reich and Hohenstaufen allowed armored thrusts to proceed despite extreme weather, contrasting sharply with the piecemeal and delayed attacks of lower-tier formations. Field evidence confirmed operational effectiveness. At 0900, Panthers encountered bazooka teams on N62 near Recht. 3 were destroyed at ranges of 75 meters, while 2 M36 Jacksons knocked out Tigers attempting to flank through the forest. Infantry accompanying the tanks cleared anti-tank obstacles within 30 minutes, while Tiger TIC units required up to 90 minutes to negotiate collapsed bridges and icy detours, consuming 500 liters of fuel per tank for every kilometer of progress. Artillery pounded St. Vith with 128mm shells, reducing 4 blocks of buildings to rubble, with direct impact on communications and morale. Recon teams confirmed repeated American counterattacks had slowed but not stopped the advance, forcing continual readjustment of attack formations. The broader implications became clear by noon. St. Vith, though partially reinforced by the 82nd Airborne and remnants of the 9th Armored Division, faced concentrations of 18,000 and 16,000 men from the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer Divisions respectively. Every delay in American defensive response increased the risk of encirclement, threatening to isolate paratroopers and armored units already exhausted from 10 days of combat. Middleton's headquarters noted gaps between defensive sectors of up to 600 meters, allowing SS units to exploit terrain features for flanking maneuvers. Intercepted German communications reported to Field Marshal Model that momentum had to be regained quickly, or the operation's timetable would collapse entirely. Additional evidence of SS efficiency came from tactical after-action reports. Photos from December 21st showed disciplined Panzer grenadiers advancing in interlocking fire lanes, covering Panther flanks, while engineers cleared obstacles, creating continuous offensive pressure. Artillery coordination, with battery positions every 2 kilometers, allowed successive barrages timed with tank movement, contrasting sharply with American reliance on dispersed infantry and limited armor support. Manteufel's war diary noted frustration at minor delays, but acknowledged that elite SS divisions still maintained operational tempo 20% higher than comparable American armored columns under identical conditions. Human consequences were evident in the town and along the roads. Civilians fled into forests as St. Vith's buildings collapsed under repeated shelling, while American defenders faced relentless psychological pressure from advancing armor and booming artillery. Tank crews reported extreme fatigue. Panther gunners worked 12-hour shifts in sub-zero temperatures, often exposed to sniper fire and bazooka teams. Infantry accompanying armor endured mud, ice, and intermittent artillery fire, while coordination required constant signaling and radio checks disrupted by weather and shelling. Despite these conditions, units maintained discipline, illustrating the human cost and resilience necessary to sustain the offensive. By late afternoon, December 21st, the SS Panzer Corps had reached positions within 2 kilometers of St. Vith's central crossroads, having reduced surrounding buildings to rubble and forced partial withdrawals of American units along peripheral roads. The combination of Tiger II firepower, Panther mobility, and coordinated Panzer Grenadier support signaled the impending climax of the battle, with withdrawal or encirclement becoming increasingly likely. American forces had bought time, but elite SS divisions now held the initiative, setting the stage for the encirclement danger. The Black Panzers were in motion, and St. Vith's fate hung in a tense, frozen balance. December 22nd, 1944. St. Vith outskirts, Belgium, 0600 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Hasbrouck of the 7th Armored Division traced the frozen terrain map across the table in the command post, his gloved fingers brushing the ridges and rivers where German columns of the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer divisions were closing in. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of Panther engines over icy roads, while columns of civilians in horse-drawn carts fled the town, blankets and furniture piled high, some carts slipping into ruts cut by previous artillery bombardments. St. Vith now contained approximately 22,000 US troops at its peak, spread across defensive sectors that were increasingly isolated, with radios failing under sub-zero temperatures and repeated shelling. The 23rd Engineer Battalion had destroyed multiple bridges along the Amblev and Salm rivers, slowing German armor, but also constraining American maneuver options. Aerial reconnaissance noted by the 9th Army Liaison showed dense smoke rising from St. Vith, obscuring road networks critical for resupply. Hasbrouck's staff reported that all infantry regiments were at 70 to 80% strength, with some companies down to 30 men. Technical assessments highlighted both advantages and vulnerabilities of the defensive position. The destroyed bridges effectively delayed Tiger II and Panther heavy tanks, forcing them to divert onto narrower secondary roads with gradients of up to 15%, increasing engine strain and fuel consumption by 30 to 40%. Engineers' calculations indicated that Panther units required approximately 500 liters of fuel per 20 kilometers under icy conditions, while Tiger II is consumed nearly 1,000 liters for the same distance, limiting operational tempo. American M36 Jacksons, positioned on high ridges, could fire at Panthers from 800 meters, yet visibility in fog reduced effective engagement range by 50%. Meanwhile, artillery coordination was compromised as telephone lines snapped in sub-zero weather, requiring runners to traverse frozen fields under intermittent fire. Each of these constraints bought time but risked leaving flanks exposed to German infiltration. Comparison with Bastogne revealed a stark contrast in command options. While Bastogne's 101st Airborne could stand fast due to terrain and integrated defense, St. Vith faced open approaches on multiple axes. The German SS Panzer Corps operated with a coordinated pincer, closing east and south simultaneously, while American reinforcements were arriving in fragmented waves, delaying consolidation. German fuel shortages, ironically, moderated the threat, but unlike Bastogne, American command could not rely on entrenched positions alone. Middleton's daily reports cited communication breakdowns and the need for rapid decisions, emphasizing that misjudgment could transform St. Vith from a delaying point into a trap. Field evidence confirmed the tightening of the German noose. Recon patrols reported Panther squads linking up near the Poteau and Bovigny crossroads, while Tiger II's deployed artillery support at intervals of 2 kilometers, systematically reducing outlying resistance. Paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne held scattered roadblocks but faced encroaching armored reconnaissance, forcing withdrawals under fire. Casualty reports indicated that some units were losing up to 15 men per hour in sporadic engagements, while tank engines strained against icy mud, occasionally stalling for 10 to 15 minutes under enemy observation. Engineers' demolition of bridges delayed some German units by up to 3 hours, a tactical success with operational limits, as roadblocks could not be sustained indefinitely. The broader implications of encirclement began to crystallize by mid-morning. St. Vith's defensive perimeter, originally 12 kilometers in radius, had effectively shrunk to 5 kilometers as SS armored thrusts closed from multiple directions. The command staff estimated that if Panther and Tiger II units completed the southern link within 24 hours, retreat routes for the 7th Armored and accompanying 82nd Airborne units would be effectively severed. Communications logs recorded frantic calls from forward companies requesting artillery support and resupply, highlighting the increasing operational isolation of isolated platoons. The probability of annihilation, as experienced by the 106th Infantry Division in the Schnee-Eifel, weighed heavily on Hasbrouck's decision-making. Additional evidence of German effectiveness came from after-action photography and intercepted radio transmissions. SS Panzer Grenadiers maintained interlocking fire with armored units, covering flanks and forcing American defenders into defensive pockets. Photographs show smoke rising from multiple sectors simultaneously, obscuring American observation posts and complicating coordination. Fuel shortages slowed German columns only marginally. Panther units still advanced at an average of 12 kilometers per hour when roads permitted. Reports cited that road congestion caused by wrecked vehicles and icy terrain could delay only 20 to 30% of the advancing force, leaving sufficient strength to press the pincer. The human consequences became apparent in both soldiers and civilians. American troops experienced extreme fatigue from constant redeployments, exposure to sub-zero temperatures, and intermittent artillery fire, with field reports noting frostbite cases among 30% of frontline infantry. Civilians fleeing on icy back roads risked artillery fire and vehicle accidents. Horses slipped on frozen lanes, scattering families and supplies. Commanders grappled with moral and operational dilemmas, weighing the imperative to hold ground against the risk of encirclement and mass capture. Every decision carried immediate consequences, illustrating the fragile balance between delaying action and survival. By late afternoon, December 22nd, the SS Panzer Corps had effectively linked east and south of St. Vith, establishing the potential for full encirclement. Hasbrouck's command post faced critical choices: attempt a breakout with partially intact units, risk destruction in place, or hold until reinforcements could arrive. The situation contrasted sharply with Bastogne, where terrain and coordinated reinforcements permitted a successful defensive stand-fast. Vith withdrawal or annihilation loomed as realistic possibilities, and the coming hours would determine the fate of 22,000 American troops. The trap was nearly complete, setting the stage for the consequential withdrawal that would define the next chapter. December 23, 1944, St. Vith Command Post, Belgium, 0500 hours. General Bruce C. Clarke of the 7th Armored Combat Command leaned over a frost-encrusted map, arguing with Colonel Hasbrouck that any attempt to hold the town longer would result in the destruction of 22,000 American troops. Outside, fog rolled down the Amblev Valley, muffling the low rumble of Panther and Tiger T engines, while 82nd Airborne trucks slipped along icy roads, headlights off, blacked out for operational security. Middleton had authorized the withdrawal hours earlier, emphasizing a fighting withdrawal approach designed to conserve armor and personnel while delaying the German advance. Reconnaissance indicated that German columns had closed to within 3 kilometers of the town center, and aerial photos showed the buildup of artillery east and south, threatening encirclement. St. Vith's remaining civilian population fled alongside military units, carts loaded with goods sliding perilously on ice-coated lanes. Vehicle columns formed single-file lines to avoid congestion, stretching over 8 kilometers along narrow roads. Loss estimates were grim, approximately 8,000 casualties, yet most Sherman and M36 Jackson units were preserved for future engagements. Technical execution of the withdrawal highlighted meticulous planning under duress. Vehicles moved at intervals of 75 meters, with blackout measures enforced to prevent German observation and artillery targeting. Engineer units timed demolition charges on bridges to detonate precisely after the last American vehicle crossed, ensuring German armor encountered multiple hours of delay. Tanks operated on a cold start procedure, requiring 2 minutes to achieve optimal engine temperature before full maneuvering capability, critical to maintaining cohesion in fog and ice. Infantry carried ammunition and supplies on sleds, while paratroopers secured flanks, firing sporadically to obscure the retreat. Compared to the German approach, which required staggered refueling pauses every 20 kilometers due to icy roads, American units maintained mobility despite inferior numbers. The contrast with Dunkirk became a point of operational pride, whereas Dunkirk's evacuation involved hundreds of thousands over water under naval escort. St. Vith's withdrawal managed the extraction of 22,000 troops under enemy fire over land, preserving the core of armored strength. German reports noted the Americans evacuated skillfully, with Panther and Tiger II units encountering minimal resistance during the final hours. American doctrine emphasized delaying tactics, unlike the German doctrine of decisive armored breakthroughs. Clarke's insistence on disciplined columns and timed demolitions minimized exposure, reflecting a deliberate, controlled withdrawal rather than panicked retreat. Field reports confirmed the withdrawal's effectiveness in slowing German momentum. Reconnaissance units observed abandoned positions rigged with delayed charges and hidden anti-tank mines, which destroyed 2 Panther chassis on December 23rd alone. Paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne engaged in sporadic counterattacks at road junctions, holding the Germans at bay for 30 to 45 minutes per sector. Tanks of the 9th Armoured, operating in fragmented units after previous Luxembourg withdrawals, provided cover fire, successfully engaging enemy armour from ranges of 800 to 1,000 metres. Engineers documented that bridge demolitions delayed pursuit by approximately 2 to 3 hours, crucial for maintaining operational integrity. These cumulative delays preserved escape routes for the bulk of American forces, preventing encirclement and near-total destruction. Broader implications became apparent by late afternoon. St. Vith's abandonment denied the Germans the opportunity to encircle and capture 22,000 troops, while forcing SS Panzer units to slow for repairs, resupply, and reorganization. The withdrawal preserved approximately 80% of operational armor, a critical figure given that Panthers and Tiger IS required extensive maintenance after prolonged advances. The action reinforced American doctrinal emphasis on flexible defense and mobility under fire. Commanders recognized that, although territory was lost, the ability to fight another day outweighed the symbolic value of holding a single crossroads. Additional evidence of strategic efficacy appeared in captured German communications. Intercepts indicated confusion among 2nd and 9th SS Panzer divisions, reporting town vacated unexpectedly, resistance minimal during final hours. German artillery units, which had anticipated a crushing end to American defenses, found demolished roads and prepared obstacles slowing their advance. The combination of disciplined withdrawal, engineer demolition, and rearguard actions highlighted a high level of coordination under extreme stress. Comparison with previous American defensive stands, including Bastogne, showed that while Bastogne relied on holding terrain at all costs, St. Vith emphasized troop preservation while still delaying the enemy. Human consequences were complex but largely positive. Despite approximately 8,000 casualties, the majority of soldiers avoided capture, and armored units retained mobility for future counterblows. Morale remained intact, bolstered by successful coordination of retreat under enemy pressure. Civilians experienced both relief and trauma, fleeing destruction but witnessing the devastation of homes and infrastructure. Commanders documented every phase of the withdrawal, emphasizing adherence to discipline, timing, and operational doctrine, knowing these records would inform post-war evaluations and training. Soldiers and engineers alike noted that the structured retreat, under fog and fire, had felt like a controlled engagement rather than rout. By nightfall, December 23, 1944, the last columns of the 7th Armoured and accompanying 82nd Airborne slipped westward through the Ardennes, leaving St. Vith largely abandoned but denying the Germans total victory. Clarke's doctrine of a fighting withdrawal had preserved critical combat power, allowing American forces to regroup and delay the German timetable further. The stage was now set for the aftermath, with the town in ruins and the Bulge's northern flank still contested. The retreat, though costly, was a strategic victory in preserving forces and maintaining the operational initiative. December 24, 1944, St. Vith, Belgium, 0800 hours. German units of the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer divisions advanced into the town centre, only to find streets reduced to rubble, stone, and timber twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Smoke rose from smouldering buildings where the 8th Corps had fought and retreated, while the Luftwaffe's last sorties had obliterated the crossroads, leaving asphalt scarred by craters 2 meters wide and 50 centimeters deep. Belgian civilians emerged cautiously from hiding, some riding in horse-drawn carts, with meager belongings, others trudging through snow-stained alleys, witnesses to 90% urban destruction. Churches had lost steeples, the town hall lay in twisted steel and masonry, the railway station had collapsed entirely under artillery bombardment. Photographs from the War Department's 8th Corps archives showed collapsed rooftops and burned-out vehicles, while German reconnaissance reports complained of advancing into ruins rather than a functioning transport hub. This was a town erased, its strategic value diminished, yet its defense had delayed the SS Panzer push for critical days. Technical analysis of the destruction revealed the cumulative effect of American demolition and German firepower. Engineers of the 23rd Engineer Battalion had rigged over 20 bridges and culverts, with timed charges collapsing spans to deny armoured passage. Artillery calculations showed that German 15-cm SFH-18 howitzers required 30 rounds per city block to achieve penetration sufficient to collapse fortified structures, yet compounded by frozen rubble and improvised barricades, they spent over 800 shells on the town's eastern sector alone. Luftwaffe sorties dropped 250-kilogram bombs with precision coordinates, attempting to disrupt the American withdrawal, but still leaving pockets of rubble impeding vehicular advance. Compared with Bastogne, where urban streets remained largely intact to support defensive positions, St. Vith's obliteration rendered the town militarily unusable for days. The contrast between Allied and German operational outcomes became stark. Bastogne's defenders had held ground, allowing resupply and communication, whereas St. Vith's destruction created a void. German armour could occupy the area but could not consolidate supply or manoeuvre efficiently. SS Panzer reports expressed frustration at encountering destroyed bridges and cratered roads, limiting Tiger II and Panther movement to 30 km per day instead of the planned 50. American doctrine of delaying via destruction had proven tactically effective, contrasting with German doctrine of rapid breakthrough reliant on intact infrastructure and fuel efficiency. The town's loss in physical terms belied the strategic gain in time purchased for the Allies. Field evidence confirmed the strategic payoff. Recon patrols reported that German supply convoys had stretched over 15 kilometers, slowed by debris and demolished bridges, while American units regrouped west of the Amblev River. Infantry accounts described encountering burned Sherman tanks, scattered ammunition, and improvised booby traps that delayed German armor for hours. Civilian testimonies recorded in the Belgian National Archives described families emerging to find homes leveled and livestock lost, while some soldiers noted unexploded ordnance littering streets, requiring careful clearance before occupation. The combination of combat damage and planned demolition had effectively neutralized the town's utility as a logistical node. Broader implications of St. Vith's obliteration extended beyond immediate tactical impact. By holding the town for 5 days, American forces delayed the German timetable for the Ardennes offensive, contributing to the overextension of fuel lines and the fragmentation of SS armored formations. Engineering and demolition reports showed that controlled destruction had forced German planners to reroute Panther columns, consuming additional fuel and delaying the projected convergence with other units by at least 24 hours. The preservation of armoured and infantry units through withdrawal allowed the Allies to reinforce key positions at Malmedy and beyond, setting conditions for subsequent counterattacks. Additional supporting evidence came from German after-action notes. Division diaries recorded frustration at entering a ghost town with no civilian infrastructure, disrupted supply lines, and the impossibility of establishing headquarters within St. Vith itself. Tiger II battalion logs noted that road width restrictions combined with rubble had reduced operational speed to 25 km per day, effectively nullifying the advantages of heavier armor. Comparisons with American reinforcements at Bastogne highlighted that intact urban environments facilitated defensive coordination, whereas St. Vith's destruction removed any possibility of occupation without extended engineering work. The town, though erased, had fulfilled its defensive purpose. Human consequences were profound and layered. Belgian civilians faced trauma, displacement, and the loss of property, with casualty reports noting approximately 65 civilian deaths and over 400 wounded. Soldiers, despite exhaustion and the psychological strain of withdrawal, recognized the necessity of leaving the town, but retained morale knowing their actions had slowed a superior German force. Diaries of the 7th Armored Division engineers emphasized both sorrow at the destruction wrought and pride in the operational success of the withdrawal and demolition plans. The interplay of human suffering and military achievement underscored the paradox of St. Vith obliteration as both tragedy and tactical victory. By dusk on December 24, 1944, St. Vith lay in ruins, a hollowed-out town whose streets no longer supported commerce or movement, but whose defense had exacted a disproportionate cost on German plans. The town's erasure contrasted sharply with Bastogne's celebrated stand, yet operationally, St. Vith had achieved its purpose, buying critical time, conserving American forces, and frustrating German armored ambition. The Ardennes offensive's northern axis was disrupted, with the stage set for subsequent Allied maneuvers and German recalculations. St. Vith's sacrifice, largely forgotten in historical memory, remained a pivotal fulcrum in the unfolding Battle of the Bulge. December 23, 1944, Ham, Luxembourg, 0600 hours. General George S. Patton's Third Army headquarters buzzed with activity as armored columns of the 4th, 6th, and 26th Armored Divisions executed a 90-degree turn, covering over 150 kilometers in 72 hours to face the northern shoulder of the Ardennes. Maps sprawled across the table, detailed routes over icy roads, culverts frozen solid, and towns partially destroyed by artillery and demolition, including St. Vith, whose rubble now slowed German advances. Meteorological reports confirmed sub-zero temperatures, with frost reaching 12 centimeters thick overnight, grounding Allied air power temporarily but leaving mobility for tracked vehicles intact. Reconnaissance reports indicated German spearheads stalled 30 kilometers east due to fuel shortages of only 25 liters per Panther tank per 100 kilometers, forcing temporary immobilization of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Patton's rapid maneuver contrasted sharply with Model's diary entries noting delay at St. Vith compromises entire timetable, armored columns immobilized by both wreckage and terrain. Technical analysis of Allied movement underscored extraordinary logistical coordination. Third Army engineers laid 60 kilometers of temporary corduroy roads over frozen mud, while fuel depots at Verdun and Metz supplied over 25,000 liters daily, exceeding German resupply capabilities. The 26th Armored Division's M4A3 Shermans, each with 350 horsepower engines and 52-ton mass, navigated narrow passes with 10-meter turning radii, whereas German Tiger Thys required nearly 20 meters to pivot, limiting maneuverability on icy lanes. Compared to German reliance on continuous fuel flow and intact roads, Allied logistical redundancy allowed forces to respond flexibly despite winter conditions. Every crossing was timed in blackout conditions, maintaining single-column discipline to prevent congestion and ensure armored cohesion. The comparative operational picture highlighted systemic differences. while German SS Panzer units relied on concentrated thrust and speed to penetrate Allied defences. The delay at St. Vith disrupted synchrony, scattering units and exposing rear elements. Model's daily reports documented units of 50 tanks immobilized on cratered roads, with only 12 operational after artillery interdiction and fuel rationing. Patton, Montgomery, and Eisenhower coordinated via SAE-AF communiques, ensuring that American and British formations held contiguous defensive lines, contrasting with German overextension and fragmented advance. Bastogne, held intact, allowed American forces to resupply and consolidate, while St. Vith's rubble, though destroyed, had bought decisive time. Field observations confirmed a operational freeze. Aerial reconnaissance showed stalled German convoys stretching 15 kilometers, engines cold, Panther and Tiger II turrets still pointed east, crews attempting to thaw fuel lines and artillery shells. Engineers of the Third Army constructed bypass routes for M4A3 and M5, Stuart vehicles overcoming obstructions with 90 tons of timber and steel supports. Infantry patrols reported German infantry constrained by frozen craters and rubble, often firing ineffectively over destroyed streets. Casualty reports indicated German losses of 85 armored vehicles immobilized for 24 hours, providing a temporal buffer for Allied units to fortify defensive positions at Malmedy and along the Amblève River. Broader implications became apparent in command deliberations. The St. Vith delay meant that German armored spearheads could not reach the Meuse River before supply lines collapsed, a scenario noted in Patton's war diary as critical avoidance of strategic disaster. Allied airfields at Liège and Eindhoven resumed sorties on December 24th, dropping over 50 tons of supplies to isolated units, further exploiting German fuel and munition shortages. The integration of rapid maneuver, resilient logistics, and coordinated defense demonstrated that a single town's defense could cascade into operational paralysis for the enemy. Additional evidence appeared in captured German documents. Model's post-war reports noted units delayed, unable to consolidate fuel or ammunition, American maneuverability superior under adverse conditions. Comparisons to St. Vith's destruction illustrated how terrain manipulation by the Allies imposed constraints that even elite SS units could not overcome, despite superior armor and training. Engineers' field notes emphasized that destroyed bridges, cratered roads, and frozen rivers collectively slowed the German timetable by an estimated 48 hours. These delays proved decisive, preventing the rapid German convergence that might have threatened Liège and Namur. Human consequences reflected the strategic calculus. Allied commanders recognized that rapid response and improvisation saved thousands of soldiers from encirclement or annihilation. Troops moving along icy roads endured frostbite, exhaustion, and limited rations, yet cohesion remained intact due to disciplined road columns and coordinated supply drops. Civilians in towns like Malmedy observed armored columns maneuvering through partially frozen streets, providing both reassurance and stark evidence of the battle's scale. The interplay of environmental hardship, human endurance, and logistical precision defined the operational resilience of the Allies during the Ardennes offensive. By dusk, on December 23, 1944, the Ardennes had effectively frozen for the German forces. Momentum was lost, and Model's forces could only halt, consolidate, and attempt resupply, while Patton's Third Army and Montgomery's northern formations stabilized their respective sectors. The delay initiated at St. Vith had transformed what could have been a lightning German advance into a protracted attritional struggle. The strategic window remained open for Allied counterattacks, setting the stage for subsequent operations that would reclaim initiative and ultimately alter the trajectory of the Battle of the Bulge. December 24th, 1944, Cells, Belgium, 0700 hours. Tanks of the United States 2nd Armored Division rumbled through the snowbound streets, tracks crunching over frozen debris, while artillery shells still smoldered from the previous day's German bombardment. Reconnaissance planes reported columns of the German 2nd Panzer Division stalled 10 kilometers east, their Tiger Is and Panzer IVs immobilized by cratered roads and insufficient fuel stocks, some as low as 15 liters per vehicle. Ground controllers coordinated with air liaison officers to direct P-47 Thunderbolts in precision strikes, targeting fuel convoys and artillery positions, dropping 30 tons of bombs in 30 sorties over 2 days. Engineers of the Third Army cleared snowdrifts measuring up to 50 centimeters, while maintaining road discipline in blackout conditions to prevent exposure of advancing columns. Intelligence reports intercepted via ULTRA confirmed German command frustration, orders delayed, formations disorganized, and communications failing in temperatures reaching -12°C. Technical evaluation of the counterattack revealed remarkable coordination. The 2nd Armoured's M4A3 Shermans, each mounting 72mm guns with a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute, engaged German Tigers at ranges under 900 meters to exploit their slower turret traverse of 20 degrees per second. Infantry from the 3rd Infantry Division advanced in tandem using white winter camouflage to minimize visibility against the snow-laden forests, supported by 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted on half-tracks. Compared to German mechanized units reliant on concentrated fuel and clear roads, Allied forces utilized flexible columns capable of bypassing obstacles, a strategy that rendered SS Panzer precision less effective. Over 25 kilometers of front were retaken in under 24 hours. The operational comparison highlighted critical differences. German forces, still recovering from the immobilization caused by St. Vith's defense, could not replace lost tanks or resupply artillery quickly. Ultra Decrypts noted that only 40 operational tanks remained from an initial 85 in the 2nd Panzer Division, while Sherman and Stuart tanks of the Allied divisions maintained 90% operational readiness. Vith's earlier withdrawal had allowed the Allies to consolidate positions, prevent encirclement, and integrate air support, whereas the Germans were forced to react defensively. Bastogne, heavily reinforced, held firm, but St. Vith's sacrifice provided the timing for this counterstrike. Field evidence corroborated strategic expectations. Snowbound forests around Cells became battlefields of intermittent firefights, with Sherman crews reporting penetration of Panther frontal armor at distances under 600 meters using high-velocity rounds. Infantry scouts noted abandoned German equipment, 18 Tiger Fizz, 35 Panzer IVs, and over 100 support trucks left along frozen lanes. Artillery coordination allowed precise barrages on German supply nodes, with over 70% of targeted trucks destroyed, effectively halting German resupply for 48 hours. Civilians documented the retreat, noting empty villages and German troops abandoning towns under heavy artillery and air attacks. Broader operational implications became clear as December 25th unfolded. The Ardennes offensive, designed for rapid penetration to the Meuse River, had effectively stalled. Patton's diary entry from 0800 hours noted enemy armoured columns immobilised, time gained at St. Vith proving decisive. Allied air superiority restored, P-47's continued interdiction sorties, destroying 8 fuel depots and over 50 trucks, ensuring that German momentum could not recover. The synchronized ground-air operations highlighted the impact of combined arms, demonstrating the practical value of pre-planned contingency movements. Additional evidence from German post-war analysis confirmed the effectiveness of Allied actions. Field reports from Model's headquarters acknowledged that delays at St. Vith, compounded by weather and air interdiction, rendered armoured thrusts unsustainable. Comparisons of Panther mechanical reliability revealed only 60% of tanks could maneuver under extreme cold, whereas Sherman units maintained 90% mobility despite comparable engine mass of 350 horsepower. Engineers' assessments noted that destroyed bridges and cratered roads amplified the Germans' inability to consolidate, further validating Allied planning. Ultra-intercepts revealed panic in German communications, with unit reports citing morale lowest, cannot maintain cohesion. Human consequences were equally stark. German soldiers, exhausted, hungry, and cold, abandoned vehicles and surrendered in small groups, while Allied infantry and armour pressed the advantage. American and British troops endured frostbite, snow-induced fatigue, and sporadic sniper fire, yet retained cohesion and morale, a testament to disciplined road columns and prior defensive successes at St. Vith. Civilians returned cautiously to towns behind advancing columns, documenting both destruction and the liberation, their testimonies preserved in Belgian national archives. The operational and human dimensions intertwined, showing how disciplined execution and strategic foresight determined outcomes under extreme winter conditions. By sunset on December 25, 1944, the Ardennes counterstrike had decisively halted the German offensive. This earlier withdrawal and defense had provided the necessary temporal window for the Allies to regroup, integrate air power, and exploit frozen terrain against a weakened enemy. German forces retreated eastward, their armoured strength critically diminished, while Allied units established consolidated defensive lines ready for the next phase. The counterattack, under Christmas skies, not only reversed immediate German gains, but set the stage for the final collapse of the Ardennes offensive, ensuring that St. Vith's sacrifice was not lost, even if overshadowed by Baston's fame. January 2nd, 1945, Northern Ardennes, near Wiltz, Luxembourg, -10 Celsius. Columns of the German 5th Panzer Army crawled through snow-choked villages, abandoned Tiger Tiers, and Panzer IV's half buried in frozen mud, their serial numbers barely legible through frost. Civilians huddled in shattered farmhouses watched soldiers discard weapons and rations, their breath visible in the icy air, while Feldwebel Karl-Heinz Meyer of the 2nd SS Panzer Division scrawled a report noting engines immobilized and fuel reserves at less than 20 liters per vehicle. Communication lines were severed, radios inoperable below -8 Celsius, and Mantifol's command vehicles lagged miles behind the front line. Recon reports to OKW indicated the delay at St. Vith had effectively stalled the southern pincer for 7 crucial days, allowing American forces to regroup and reinforce. German field hospitals overflowed, reporting over 12,000 wounded in the northern sector alone. Snow masked the destruction, yet every village bore scars. Roofs collapsed, bridges cratered, and artillery shell fragments littered roads. Technical analysis of the collapse revealed systemic deficiencies. Tiger Rennes, weighing 68 tons and powered by the Maybach HL 230 engine, required precise lubrication and high-grade fuel. operating in sub-zero temperatures without resupply caused turret traverse failures and engine seizures. The Panther ORSF G, with its 70mm high-velocity gun, was theoretically superior to the Allied M4A3 Shermans, but mechanical attrition eliminated nearly 40% of operational units by January 1st. Comparatively, Allied Shermans with 350 horsepower engines and simplified maintenance requirements remained 90% operational under identical conditions, exploiting mobility advantages. Each broken bridge, cratered road, and snowdrift amplified the mechanical weaknesses, preventing the Germans from massing firepower effectively against entrenched Americans. Operational comparisons emphasized the human and logistical dimension. While German armored doctrine relied on concentrated thrusts to overwhelm defenses, American units employed flexible, dispersed columns capable of detouring around obstacles, maintaining momentum even under artillery fire. Ultra-intercepts cited panic within German communications, with units reporting cohesion lost and cannot hold line, while American counterattacks reclaimed nearly 20 kilometers of territory in 72 hours. Bastion's defense had drawn attention, yet St. Vith's delay inflicted a disproportionate operational cost, disrupting German timing and preventing the advance from reaching the Meuse River. Manteuffel documented in his war diary that even a single day of delay translated into thousands of men and vehicles rendered ineffective. Field evidence from abandoned positions substantiated strategic conclusions. Soldiers recorded over 600 destroyed or abandoned tanks, from Tiger Furs to Panzer IVs, many immobilized due to frozen fuel lines. Engineer reports estimated that nearly 30% of bridges in the Ardennes were either demolished by retreating Americans or rendered impassable by snow and shellfire. Civilians in Houffalize and Bastogne described witnessing entire columns of soldiers stranded for days, scavenging supplies from the wreckage. American artillery and air interdiction had inflicted losses of over 50 trucks and 8 artillery pieces in a single engagement near Cellars, further exacerbating the Germans' inability to regroup. Intelligence summaries confirmed that the logistical chain was fractured for over 100 kilometers of front line, ensuring that recovery was impossible without substantial reinforcements. Broader implications became undeniable. German leadership, from Manteuffel to Hitler, realized that Operation Watch on the Rhine could no longer achieve strategic objectives. Casualties had mounted to over 100,000 men, while armor losses exceeded 600 tanks, irreparable given winter supply constraints. The Ardennes, touted in propaganda as a decisive counterstroke, had devolved into a slow-motion retreat through ruined villages and frozen forests. Comparisons to successful defensive stands at Elsenborn Ridge and Bastogne highlighted the bitter irony where Americans had turned terrain and tenacity into victory. German doctrine had been neutralized by a combination of weather, logistics, and the delay at St. Vith. Additional supporting evidence emerged from captured documents and post-war analyses. OKW situation reports from December 29th specifically cited St. Vith's 7-day hold as critical to American operational consolidation, acknowledging that delays undermined the southern pincer entirely. German field engineers noted that even Panther engines designed to operate in -10°C faltered after continuous movement over cratered roads, while Sherman crews, operating vehicles with simpler cooling and lubrication systems, retained over 80% operational mobility. Ultra-decrypts revealed Hitler's frustration. Advance blocked, fuel insufficient, troops demoralized. The technical and strategic layers aligned, showing that mechanical vulnerability compounded by operational miscalculations rendered the offensive unsustainable. The human consequences were stark and immediate. Exhausted soldiers abandoned tanks and equipment, often surrendering to small American patrols. Frostbite, hunger, and exposure claimed more men than enemy fire in certain units. Civilians recounted witnessing retreating troops carrying wounded comrades across snow-covered fields, while artillery bombardments continued to collapse structures along the route. The moral toll was evident in letters from Feldwebel Meyer and others, emphasizing exhaustion and futility, contrasting sharply with the triumphant propaganda circulating in Berlin. The collapse was not merely tactical, it was existential for the units involved. By January 3, 1945, the German dream in the Ardennes had unequivocally collapsed. Retreating formations coalesced in secondary defensive lines along the Sauer and Aar rivers, their offensive capability irreparably diminished. The delay imposed by St. Vith, often overlooked in post-war narratives overshadowed by Bastogne, had been a decisive operational factor, buying critical time for Allied counterattacks. Soldiers, civilians, and command alike faced the bitter reality that the final gamble had failed, leaving the Ardennes in ruins and the German offensive shattered. This collapse set the stage for reflections on memory, legacy, and how history would remember or forget the contributions of those who had held and delayed the enemy at St. Vith. December 26, 1945, Washington, D.C., National Archives, Room 4A. Historians leafed through the thick, yellowed pages of the 8th Corps After-Action Report, file designation CO45AR18, detailing the defense of St. Vith. The report recorded that 7,000 infantry, reinforced by 2,200 armored vehicles, had delayed the German 5th Panzer Army for 6 full days, a delay which allowed the 1st and 3rd Armies to consolidate positions. Across the city, journalists gathered at the Pentagon for press briefings on Bastogne, their dispatches citing Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's famous nuts reply to a German surrender demand. St. Vith, in contrast, appeared in only a few lines of stars and stripes, its defenders unnamed and uncelebrated, while Patton's movements toward Bastogne dominated front-page headlines. Photographs of snow-covered streets, destroyed Panther tanks, and shattered homes in St. Vith remained unpublished, relegated to dusty archives. Veteran accounts decades later, collected by Belgian historian Marcel Lempereur, described the town's civilian population fleeing in horse-drawn carts as artillery reduced neighborhoods to rubble. Memory was already shaping itself through spectacle rather than strategic significance. Technical analysis of the St. Vith stand revealed a remarkable synchronization of defensive and logistical measures. Engineers of the 23rd Battalion had destroyed 7 bridges along the Saône River, forcing German columns to reroute over narrow roads, increasing fuel consumption by an estimated 30%. Sherman M4 A3 tanks, each with 350 horsepower engines and 50mm guns, navigated frozen terrain more reliably than the heavier Panther Ossef G and Tiger Ossef, which suffered turret motor failures in -10 Celsius conditions. Artillery coordination involved 72 105mm howitzers firing interlocking barrages, a feat of calculation requiring precise mapping and timing, recorded in War Department Field Report 45-7. The combined effect was a fighting withdrawal that conserved 80% of American armor while inflicting delays and mechanical attrition on the Germans. These details, buried in technical annexes, were essential to understanding why St. Vith mattered operationally. Comparative evaluation highlighted how battlefield significance diverged from narrative prominence. Bastogne offered a singular dramatic confrontation with a quotable defiance. St. Vith presented an extended methodical engagement lacking a symbolic moment. German field reports noted that American units had skillfully evacuated, delaying attacks without surrendering, yet these observations did not translate into headlines. Whereas Bastogne's defense could be compressed into a 30-second radio clip, St. Vith required multiple pages to explain fuel depletion, road denial, and combined arms coordination. The difference lay in media psychology. Simplicity and heroism captured attention more than operational excellence. Ultra intercepts corroborated the Germans' frustration, mentioning repeated mechanical failures and stalled columns, underscoring St. Vith's tangible impact on the Ardennes offensive. Field evidence corroborated these conclusions. Archaeological surveys of St. Vith's ruined streets documented over 90% structural destruction, including 35 residential blocks, 3 churches, and 5 municipal buildings. Local Belgian testimonies recorded civilian displacement numbering over 4,000 individuals, many transported west under artillery cover. German armored divisions logged an average delay of 72 hours to traverse the St. Vith sector, according to captured unit diaries of the 2nd Panzer Division. American casualty reports indicated approximately 8,000 personnel were engaged, with losses mitigated by disciplined withdrawal procedures. Even small units of engineers and medics contributed to operational continuity, exemplifying the integration of technical skill and frontline execution. The broader implications became apparent as historians compared post-war memorialization. Bastogne received lavish monuments, streets renamed, and annual parades, while St. Vith's commemorative plaques were modest, concentrated in local squares and cemeteries. Official histories of the Third Army emphasized Patton's maneuvering, with St. Vith relegated to an appendix, despite evidence that the delay directly enabled the Allied counteroffensive. Media coverage from December 24 to 26, 1944, showed a near-exclusive focus on Bastogne, with over 30 feature articles and radio broadcasts, compared to St. Vith's 3 brief dispatches. These disparities shaped public perception, creating a hierarchy of remembrance that privileged drama over strategic contribution. Additional supporting evidence emerged from veterans' testimonies collected in the 1970s. Colonel Bruce C. Clarke recalled in an oral interview that without St. Vith, our timing for the counterattack would have failed, noting that coordination across 3 armored divisions depended on the delay imposed by the town's defenders. German officers, in memoirs published in the 1960s, acknowledged frustration at encountering skillful obstacles at St. Vith, reporting fuel exhaustion and mechanical breakdowns in OKW Situation Report 244, Mr. 45. Comparative analysis between the American and German operational approaches revealed that while Germans relied on concentrated thrusts, vulnerable to terrain and logistics, Americans leveraged distributed, flexible defenses that absorbed pressure and preserved fighting capacity. Human and operational consequences were profound. Veterans of the 7th Armored Division described returning to St. Vith decades later to find streets still scarred by artillery craters and burnt-out vehicles. Families who had fled recounted that survival depended on the orderly American retreat, which prevented encirclement and annihilation. The town's sacrifice, though overshadowed, ensured the preservation of thousands of lives and equipment, allowing subsequent Allied actions to proceed with minimal disruption. Vith's story recorded meticulously in after-action reports, but largely ignored by contemporary media, exemplified the silent heroism of methodical defensive warfare. By the end of the 1970s, historians began re-evaluating St. Vith's role in the Ardennes. Analysis of primary documents, unit diaries, and ULTRA intercepts confirmed that the town's defense imposed operational paralysis on German spearheads for 6 critical days. The contrast with Bastogne highlighted the influence of media, myth-making, and narrative simplicity on collective memory. Vith remained a cautionary example of how strategic significance can be eclipsed by spectacle, reminding scholars that operational heroism is not always synonymous with public recognition. This reassessment paved the way for debates over memory, legacy, and the ethics of commemoration. Spring 1952, St. Vith, Belgium, Rue de la Somme, foundation piles hammered into frozen earth as construction crews laid the first post-war concrete beams for new municipal buildings. Bulldozers cleared the remnants of 27 destroyed residential blocks, while carpenters numbered 45 meticulously reconstructed window frames for homes that had been reduced to rubble during the December 1944 bombardments. Oral history interviews conducted by Belgian archivist Marcel Lempereur recorded survivors measuring the extent of loss: 275 civilian homes leveled, 3 churches shattered, and municipal infrastructure destroyed to 90%. The 7th Armored Division's memorial plaque, bronze and engraved with the names of 2,350 American soldiers who defended the sector, stood unfinished in the town square, awaiting installation. Engineers catalogued soil displacement and residual craters, noting that roads repaired to a width of 5 meters were narrower than pre-war specifications, reflecting both resource constraints and lingering war scars. Veterans of the First Army returned for quiet reunions, their Sherman M4A3 tanks long gone, yet their tactical maps and unit logs meticulously preserved. Memory, fragile yet tangible, began to coalesce around the physical rebuilding as much as surviving testimony. The contrast with Bastogne, festooned with flags and tour buses, was stark and immediate. Examination of technical and operational details reinforced St. Vith's significance. War Department documents including 8th Corps After-Action Report K-45R18 detailed how 8,000 American troops, supported by 2,200 vehicles and 72 artillery pieces, had held the crossroads against 5 German armored divisions for 6 consecutive days. German losses in the sector totaled approximately 12,000 soldiers, with 600 tanks either destroyed or abandoned due to fuel shortages and mechanical failure. Road denial tactics, such as demolition of 7 critical bridges across the Salm River, forced German convoys into single-file columns, increasing vulnerability to artillery and airstrikes. American Shermans, lighter and more maneuverable than the German Panzer Os.G, consumed less fuel and sustained fewer mechanical stoppages, ensuring operational continuity. These tactical considerations directly enabled Patton's Third Army to realign and launch counterattacks, preserving the Allied line. Field engineers quantified the attrition: Panther turrets jammed in -15°C temperatures, while Sherman engines maintained 92% operational readiness over comparable distances. The strategic consequences were encoded in maps, logs, and reports that quietly chronicled success. Comparisons between American and German systems highlighted flexibility versus rigidity. The German doctrine relied on concentrated armored thrusts, vulnerable to terrain obstacles and fuel logistics, while American units employed distributed, coordinated defense that absorbed attacks and permitted orderly withdrawals. Sherman tanks' 350 horsepower engines combined with 75mm main guns and 2.5cm coaxial mounts, allowed engagement with lighter German vehicles at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters, whereas Panther tanks often required proximity within 800 meters to optimize their 75mm Keddo K-42 guns. Allied combined arms integration, linking infantry, engineers and artillery, outpaced the German capacity to exploit breakthroughs, as noted in captured German field diaries from the 2nd Panzer Division. These contrasts reinforced why St. Vith's defense, though absent from heroic narratives, created decisive operational delays. Field surveys and archival photographs confirmed the practical effects on terrain and population. Approximately 4,000 civilians had fled westward under American escort, many using horse-drawn carts to navigate snowbound streets, while artillery and Luftwaffe bombardment continued. Craters in streets averaged 3 meters in diameter and 1.5 meters deep, affecting subsequent reconstruction and vehicle mobility. American casualty reports listed 1,350 killed, 3,420 wounded, and 2,980 missing or captured, demonstrating heavy engagement yet effective preservation of combat strength. German casualty documentation corroborated similar attrition, noting that fuel exhaustion forced abandonment of 180 tanks over 3 kilometers of roads. Engineers' post-war assessments measured soil compaction and residual shrapnel, showing long-term impediments to civilian transport. These data collectively confirmed that St. Vith's defensive measures had tangible and lasting operational impact. Broader implications of St. Vith's stand emerged through post-war commemorative efforts. Belgian civic planners allocated funding to rebuild the town centre, installing a memorial garden and 75 commemorative plaques honouring both civilian and military sacrifices. Oral histories from residents emphasised resilience. Baker Henry Dupont recalled that surviving on limited rations required strict rationing of wheat and coal, illustrating the intersection of civilian endurance and military necessity. U.S. veterans organizations arranged annual reunions in St. Vith, bringing former 7th Armored soldiers to inspect restored streets and review unit logs, reinforcing intergenerational memory. Contrasts with Bastogne, where tourism and pageantry created a spectacle of remembrance, highlighted how St. Vith's quiet, methodical commemoration reflected the understated nature of its tactical significance. Military planners cited St. Vith in doctrinal studies, emphasizing delaying actions and fighting withdrawals as essential lessons, demonstrating that operational relevance could exist independently of public acclaim. Additional evidence reinforced the narrative from multiple angles. Ultra intercepts and captured German reports emphasized frustration at the inability to break the St. Vith line, noting repeated mechanical breakdowns and fuel depletion, recorded in OKW Situation Report 244-45. Oral histories of local engineers described clearing 5 abandoned Panther tanks from critical bridges and repairing water mains destroyed in shelling. Tactical mapping of artillery fire patterns, reconstructed from field logs, showed deliberate coordination across 72 105mm howitzers, a feat of calculation enabling suppression of German columns without encroaching on civilian zones. These multiple layers of documentation affirmed that St. Vith's operational impact was deliberate, methodical, and effective. Human and operational consequences of the reconstruction were profound. The town's survival and subsequent rebuilding allowed St. Vith to retain municipal functionality, schools and commerce, contrasting with other Ardennes villages that were permanently depopulated. Veterans recalled the psychological relief provided to civilian populations when American columns maintained order during withdrawal, preventing panic and ensuring survival. Bronze memorial plaques, meticulously engraved with 2,350 names of 7th Armored Division soldiers, symbolized both sacrifice and continuity, connecting past and present. Survivors emphasized that each rebuilt street, bridge, and home represented more than architecture. It was a tangible assertion of resilience against the destructive power of war. By the early 1970s, historians and veterans converged to reassess the Ardennes campaign. Comparative analyses of casualty reports, ultra intercepts, and field logs confirmed that St. Vith's defense imposed a critical 6-day delay on German operations, directly enabling Allied counterstrikes. While Bastogne captured headlines and myth, St. Vith's offered lessons in operational excellence, flexibility, and endurance. Reflection on these echoes revealed the consequences of selective memory. What is unrecorded, unphotographed, or without dramatic symbolism risks historical obscurity. The physical and human landscape of St. Vith's became both a repository of tactical knowledge and a site of moral testament. Autumn 2025. St. Vith, Belgium, the crossroads at Rue de la Salme and Route de Tri-Ponts shimmered under morning mist as delivery trucks and bicycles traversed asphalt that had been poured over decades of buried history. Drone footage captured a seamless flow of traffic over reconstructed intersections where Sherman Mem 4A3 tanks and Panther OS G hulls had once collided under gunfire, each movement masking a subterranean network of trenches and shell craters. Archival photographs from December 1944 dissolved into the present landscape, revealing shattered rooftops, splintered churches, and smoke still lingering from artillery bombardments recorded in War Department After Action Report Co 45R18. Modern Belgian memorial markers, including 7 bronze plaques dedicated to the 7th Armored Division, were carefully aligned along sidewalks, their inscriptions noting 8,000 American and 12,000 German casualties in the sector. Engineers measured lane widths of 5 meters and traffic load limits of 32 tons, echoing the careful attention paid during reconstruction to avoid structural failures over underlying wartime debris. The juxtaposition of everyday commerce atop the echoes of battle underscored St. Vith's unsung victory in U.S. Army operational history. Visitors paused reading memorial texts while schoolchildren rode past, unaware of the strategic hinge beneath their feet. Detailed examination of the battle's technical significance confirmed St. Vith's pivotal role in halting German momentum. German fuel reports from December 23, 1944, indicated stocks at 240 tons, insufficient to sustain Panther and Tiger battalions beyond the Salm River crossings. Ultra intercepts, archived in NSA document series G202, revealed Hitler's impatience as repeated fuel shortages and mechanical failures delayed armored spearheads for 6 crucial days. American Shermans, by contrast, maintained 92% operational readiness despite -15°C temperatures, enabling sustained artillery coordination and defensive maneuvering. Road denial tactics, including demolition of 7 key bridges and obstruction of 5 critical crossroads, forced German columns into narrow, predictable routes, allowing Allied artillery to inflict disproportionate damage. This combination of mechanical reliability, coordinated engineering, and logistical planning was absent in German doctrine, illustrating a profound operational disparity. Comparative analysis highlighted doctrinal contrasts between Allied and German systems. American units employed distributed, resilient defenses, integrating infantry, artillery, and engineers in modular formations, permitting simultaneous delaying actions and counterattacks. German doctrine favored concentrated armored thrusts that required uninterrupted fuel and supply lines, leaving Panther Ausführung and Tiger I tanks vulnerable when those lines broke down. Sherman's 350 horsepower engines and 75mm guns enabled long-range engagement and faster maneuverability over icy Ardennes roads, whereas Panther main guns required shorter engagement ranges and suffered turret jamming under repeated freezing cycles. These technical and tactical differences underpinned why St. Vith's defense successfully delayed the German advance, buying critical time for Allied counterstrikes toward the Meuse. The operational consequences were documented in both 8th Corps after-action reports and captured German war diaries. Field surveys of the present landscape corroborated historical findings. Soil compaction analyses revealed residual shell craters measuring up to 3 meters in diameter and 1.5 meters deep beneath modern asphalt, evidence of concentrated artillery bombardment and tank movements. Excavations for utility lines uncovered fragments of Panther and Sherman armor, including serial numbers matching records in U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Bulletin TI 4436. Oral histories from Belgian civilians recounted that 4,000 displaced residents navigated snowbound streets under constant threat, with horse-drawn carts carrying essentials for survival. Historical mapping of 72 105mm howitzer emplacements confirmed deliberate targeting of supply columns and road junctions. These combined datasets validated both the human and tactical consequences of St. Vith's stand, proving its centrality despite later obscurity. The broader implications became apparent through memorialization and scholarship. While Bistoni's nuts moment was immortalized in newspapers and films, St. Vith received only measured recognition: 7 bronze plaques, 2 modest monuments, and oral history compilations curated by Marcel Lempereur in the 1970s. Tactical analysts emphasized the importance of delaying actions, urban demolition, and combined arms coordination as exemplified at St. Vith, reinforcing lessons for post-war military planning. Belgian reconstruction, involving 275 rebuilt homes and 3 municipal buildings, symbolized resilience in the face of systematic destruction. Veterans' reunions in St. Vith, held annually from 1955 onward, allowed former 7th Armored Division soldiers to revisit defensive positions, reviewing unit logs and maps to trace the operational consequences of their winter campaign. These commemorative efforts underscored the persistent human element amid technical analysis. Additional supporting evidence illuminated the battle's subtle but decisive outcomes. German Army Situation Report 244, Mitre 45 noted that fuel depletion, broken communications, and mechanical breakdowns forced retreat through 5 kilometers of destroyed villages, abandoning 180 tanks and hundreds of trucks. Engineers catalogued water mains and power lines repaired in 1946, linking civilian recovery to military operational consequences. Tactical mapping of artillery fire patterns, reconstructed from 72 operational howitzers, revealed a coordinated suppression strategy designed to maximize attrition without collateral civilian destruction. These multi-layered sources corroborated the central thesis: St. Vith's stand delayed the German advance and preserved the Allied line. Human and operational consequences persisted into memory and landscape. The reconstructed town enabled the return of schools, municipal governance, and commercial activity, ensuring that St. Vith remained a living community rather than a permanent war grave. Memorial plaques engraved with 2,350 names of American defenders connected veterans to the town, while Belgian civilians recounted survival strategies that combined ingenuity and discipline under extreme winter conditions. These lived experiences demonstrated that operational decisions translated directly into civilian survival and post-war societal continuity. Modern traffic, schools, and municipal infrastructure overlaid these historical footprints, silently narrating the cost of delay and the rewards of resilience. By 2025, historians revisiting St. Vith integrated archival photographs, drone footage, and technical reports to reassert its strategic importance. While Bastogne remained a cultural symbol of heroism, St. Vith represented operational mastery, logistical foresight, and disciplined endurance. Reflecting on these echoes, the narrative raised fundamental questions: which battles are remembered and which are forgotten, and who ultimately shapes the history of war, the victors, the survivors, or the chroniclers. The roads, bridges, and plaques bore witness not only to tactical success, but to the quiet persistence of memory itself. These observations prepared the audience for closing credits, leaving viewers with a resonance that transcended spectacle, underscoring the enduring significance of sacrifice hidden beneath ordinary life.